Hey there, tonight we're diving into the grimy world of a medieval executioner's assistant, where the truth is your biggest challenge wasn't the blood, it was the gossip from the gallows. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. You're standing in the middle of a bustling medieval marketplace, the air thick with the smell of livestock and yesterday's ale, when someone taps you on the shoulder. It's not a friendly tap, mind you, but the kind that makes you think, "Oh, what did I do now?" As it turns out, you're about to be offered a job. Not just any job, but one that involves quite a bit of chopping and a whole lot of public spectacle. Congratulations, you're on the fast track to becoming an executioner's assistant. Now, before you get too excited, let's address the elephant, or should I say the headless horseman, in the room. This was not a career you found at a medieval job fair. Nope, no scrolls advertising, wanted, executioner's sidekick, pinned to the tavern wall. You were chosen based on your unfortunate proximity to the executioner himself, or perhaps because you were down on your luck, and this was a quick ticket to a handful of pence. And by a handful, I mean just that, often 2 or 3 pence per execution. Yes, that's right. You could buy a loaf of bread or maybe a pint of beer if you were lucky, but don't expect to be rolling in riches. In the 1300s, being an executioner's assistant was about as popular as a rat at a feast. Society needed you, sure, but didn't really want to see you at the local tavern. You were the Grim Reaper's apprentice, and with that came a social stigma so thick it could choke a dragon. People avoided eye contact, and inviting you to dinner was like asking a plague rat to babysit your kids. But hey, at least you'd always get a table right. The reason anyone would take up this ghastly gig boils down to one thing: necessity. In a world where the average life expectancy was about 30 to 40 years, if you were lucky enough to dodge the Black Death and warfare, securing any job that paid was a minor miracle. Economic hardship was the real executioner here, and you were just trying to stay one step ahead of the chopping block yourself. Let's face it, the medieval economy didn't exactly have a robust welfare system. You worked, or you starved. Simple as that. Becoming an executioner's assistant might have been a soul-crushing gig, but it was marginally better than the alternative, which might be begging or worse. Sometimes, even the lowest rung on the social ladder looks good when you're hanging on by your fingernails. Now, you might be wondering, why such a paltry sum for a job that literally involved life and death? The truth is, the medieval mindset didn't put a high price on what was considered a necessary evil. Public executions were a form of entertainment, a macabre reality show where you, the assistant, had a starring role. The public didn't pay for tickets, and the executioner's wages came from the town's purse, which was about as deep as a puddle. Plus, there was the little matter of the church. Ah, the medieval church, always ready to remind everyone of their sins, including yours for even touching an executioner's axe. You could forget about a blessed burial. You were more likely to end up in a pit outside the city walls. But hey, at least you'd have company. Your fellow pariahs would be right there with you. In this bleak landscape, let's not overlook the occasional perks. If you were fortunate enough to stick around long enough, you might gain a certain level of notoriety. People would know your name, if not exactly your face, because let's be honest, they'd rather not look at you too closely. And perhaps, just perhaps, you'd earn a grudging respect for doing the job nobody else wanted. So there you are, in the thick of it, living a life where your best friend is a block of wood and your closest allies are the ropes and blades that make your work possible. It's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it, and for a couple of pence, that someone is you. You're not just surviving, you're performing a grim service to a society that shuns you. And as the axe falls, you realize that the price of this job is more than just a few coins. It's a chunk of your humanity. But hey, at least it's a living. So, you've settled into your grim gig, where the tools of your trade are as much a part of your life as the air you breathe. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of your daily slog, a parade of duties that could make even the most hardened medieval stomach turn. First up, there's the sharpening of axes. a task that's as mundane as it is crucial. Forget the romantic image of a lone, hooded figure swinging a gleaming blade with precision. The reality is much less glamorous. You're hunched over a grindstone, working the metal until it's sharp enough to split a hair or a neck. The grindstone, by the way, doesn't magically appear in your workshop. You often have to lug it out from storage, a hefty piece of equipment that could double as a medieval gym membership. And let's not forget the ropes. Oh, the ropes. It's your job to ensure they're sturdy enough to hold a convicted soul without snapping mid-swing. A broken rope might sound like a minor inconvenience, but let's be real. It's a PR nightmare. You need to be the MacGyver of medieval materials, checking and rechecking every knot, because a failed execution is bad for business, and your already tarnished reputation. Now, about managing the crowd. You might think this part sounds like a piece of cake, but remember, we're talking about a mob that's been whipped into a frenzy by the promise of blood and justice. Picture it. You, an entertainment coordinator for the most morbid show in town. Your job is to keep the peace and ensure the execution goes off without a hitch, all while dodging the occasional rotten tomato aimed your way. There's no velvet rope or bouncer here, just you and your wits against the tide of humanity, eager for the spectacle. The lead-up to the main event is a spectacle in itself. There's a ritualistic rhythm to it all, and it's steeped in superstitions that make your task list look like a medieval magic show. For instance, before a beheading, you might toss salt over your left shoulder to ward off any lingering spirits who might hold a grudge. Superstition dictates that hanging garlic around your neck could prevent the souls of the deceased from coming back to haunt you. It sounds silly now, but when you're dealing with the literal weight of life and death, you'll take any luck you can get. And then there are the bizarre rituals that would make even the most devoted medieval churchgoer raise an eyebrow. Some believed that wearing a red sash could protect you from curses. Others insisted on whispering an incantation over the executioner's block, a sort of verbal insurance policy against the wrath of the underworld. It's a peculiar blend of faith and fear, a dance with the devil that's as much about psychology as it is about spiritual defense. The procedure of an execution itself was a tightly choreographed affair, and you'd better believe there was no room for error. The condemned often had the dubious honor of being paraded through the streets. Think of it as the original walk of shame. This grim procession was meant to serve as a stark warning to the townsfolk. Behave, or this could be you. The assistant, yours truly, was responsible for ensuring the prisoner didn't escape in a last-ditch act of desperation. Finally, when the moment arrives, the executioner and assistant must perform with the precision of a well-oiled machine. A botched execution could spell disaster, not just for the poor soul on the block, but for you and your boss. The executioner's reputation, and consequently yours, was on the line. A clean, swift blow was the goal, and anything less was a professional faux pas of epic proportions. As you can see, the day-to-day life of an executioner's assistant was a dizzying mix of mundane tasks and high-stakes drama, with a side of superstition for good measure. It wasn't just about swinging an axe or tying a noose. It was about navigating a labyrinth of societal expectations and personal survival. And while the romanticized notions of medieval justice might paint a picture of chivalry and honor, the truth was often as gritty and unrefined as the streets themselves. So, next time you find yourself lamenting your own gig, remember, at least your job doesn't involve deflecting curses, managing a bloodthirsty crowd, and ensuring your boss doesn't miss his mark. In the medieval world, it was all in a day's work for an executioner's assistant. And as the sun sets on another day of grim duties, you have to wonder if you'd rather be anywhere else. Until tomorrow, that is, when you'll do it all over again. And as the sun sets on another day of grim duties, you have to wonder if you'd rather be anywhere else. Until tomorrow, that is, when you'll do it all over again. Ah, but let's not jump ahead just yet. Before the rooster crows and you head back to the grindstone, there's a heftier topic to tackle. Those oh-so-essential tools of the trade and their eyebrow-raising costs. First up, let's talk swords. Not the kind brandished by knights in shining armor, but the executioner's sword, a grim celebrity in its own right. These blades were no ordinary weapons. Crafted to behead with a single, decisive blow, they were as specialized as they were costly. A good executioner's sword could run you about 20 to 30 shillings, which might not sound like much until you realize that's roughly the equivalent of a few months' wages for most medieval workers. It's like buying a car today, if the car were used to lop off heads instead of drive to the grocery store. And who foots the bill for this lethal luxury? Not the town, which was usually as tight-fisted as a miser at a charity fair. No, it's the executioner himself, or rather, his assistant, who often had to scrimp and save, or more likely, beg a local lord for the funds. Think of it as a medieval Kickstarter, only instead of offering backers a tote bag or a shout-out, you're promising the swift and efficient dispatch of justice. Then there's the gallows, the towering symbol of medieval justice that loomed over the town square like a grim reminder of mortality. Constructing one of these wooden monstrosities wasn't cheap either. Depending on the size and complexity, a gallows could cost anywhere from 40 to 60 shillings. That's a hefty chunk of change in a world where your average peasant lived on a few pence a day. And maintenance, don't even get started. Wood doesn't preserve itself, and part of your less-than-glamorous job involved checking for rot and ensuring the dreaded drop operated smoothly. But what about the ropes? Ah, those twisted strands of hemp were your lifeline, literally. A sturdy rope might set you back a few pence, but skimping on quality was a gamble no one wanted to take. You can imagine the awkwardness of a rope snapping mid-sentence, quite the faux pas in the world of public executions. Better to fork out the extra coin for a rope that won't let you, or your condemned client, down. Now, don't think for a second that all this financial burden only fell upon your shoulders. The village council, always keen to preserve its reputation, might occasionally chip in, especially if the execution was of a high-profile nature. But more often than not, you were left juggling these costs alongside your paltry wage. It's the kind of economic pressure that could drive anyone to drink, though with your earnings, you'd be nursing a single pint for a week. So why bother, you ask? Why juggle such financial woes for a job that came with so much baggage? Part of the answer lies in the political landscape of the time. Public executions were more than just a morbid form of entertainment. They were a statement. They demonstrated the power of the ruling class and served as a warning to any potential troublemakers. The assistant, though often seen as a mere cog in the wheel, played a crucial part in these power plays. Take, for instance, the execution of a noble. Such an event was as much about removing a political rival as it was about justice. You, as the assistant, had to ensure everything went off without a hitch. A botched execution could result in riots, or worse, a questioning of the local lord's authority. You were a pawn, sure, but one with a surprisingly important role in the chess game of medieval politics. And let's not forget the ever-watchful eyes of the church. They might have frowned upon your profession, but they were not above using executions to reinforce their moral teachings. A well-timed sermon on the perils of sin, delivered in the shadow of a freshly used gallows, was a powerful tool for keeping the masses in line. In this grand tapestry of medieval life, you were the thread that held many of these narratives together. Unseen, perhaps, but essential. The political implications of your work were as intricate as the patterns on a royal tapestry. You were part of a larger story, one that spanned kingdoms and crossed into the very fabric of societal order. Yet, the irony of it all, most executioners' assistants, including you, were often blissfully unaware of these larger stakes. You were too busy sharpening blades, checking ropes, and keeping your head down, both literally and metaphorically. The weight of history pressed upon your shoulders, and you were just trying to make it through another day without losing your own neck in the process. So, the next time you find yourself lamenting your own financial strains, spare a thought for your medieval counterpart. They bore the weight of the world's justice on their shoulders, all for a job that was both thankless and terrifying. But hey, at least they never had to worry about filing taxes or student loans, right? In the end, it was all just part of the daily grind, one that involved a lot more grinding than most would care to remember. So, while your medieval counterpart grappled with the grim economics of their trade, there's another, darker currency at play, the psychological toll. Picture this. You're not just managing execution logistics, but also navigating the murky waters of your own mind. The job was a head-spinning cocktail of adrenaline and dread, with a chaser of moral ambiguity. You might have thought you'd grow numb over time, that each swing of the axe would chip away at your conscience until you felt nothing. But history, with all its surprising twists, often has a different script. Sure, there's the romantic notion that medieval executioners' assistants were cold, unfeeling automatons, a stereotype as enduring as it is inaccurate. In reality, historical accounts suggest a much more complex picture. Take, for instance, excerpts from the diary of Franz Schmidt, a 16th-century executioner from Nuremberg. His writings reveal a man deeply affected by his work, one who kept meticulous records not just of executions, but also of his personal reflections. He lamented the souls he dispatched, and his entries often read more like confessions than chronicles of duty. France wasn't an anomaly. Many executioners and their assistants struggled with the emotional weight of their roles. Can you blame them? Watching life flicker out under your watch, time and again, would take its toll on anyone. Modern psychology offers us some insight into this emotional minefield. Studies on trauma suggest that repeated exposure to death and violence can lead to symptoms akin to PTSD. Nightmares, flashbacks, and emotional numbness. These are the ghosts that haunted the medieval executioner's apprentice long after the crowds dispersed. But medieval folks weren't entirely clueless about mental health, even if they didn't have the terminology we do today. Coping mechanisms were as varied as the individuals themselves. Some turned to religion, seeking solace in the church's promise of redemption. Others found refuge in the bottle, hoping to drown their sorrows in ale, though their meager wages made this a rare luxury. Yet others sought camaraderie in the only place they were truly accepted, the fringes of society, among fellow outcasts who shared their burdens. And let's not forget the gallows humor, a term that might as well have been coined for these folks. Black humor was a valuable tool, a way to distance oneself from the horrors of the job. A sardonic quip here, a dark jest there. It was a coping mechanism as old as time itself. When you're face to face with death on a daily basis, sometimes the only thing left to do is laugh, if only to keep from crying. Now, let's bust another myth while we're at it. The idea that these assistants were universally despised and abhorred. Sure, they were social pariahs, but not everyone kept them at arm's length. In some communities, the executioner and his posse commanded a strange sort of respect. They were seen as necessary evils, and their role in maintaining order was acknowledged, if not openly appreciated. It was a relationship built on grudging acceptance rather than outright disdain. That said, the toll on personal relationships was often steep. Marriages could be strained, friendships frayed. Imagine trying to unwind after a long day of executions, difficult when your spouse or neighbor recoils at your touch. Historical records show that many assistants faced isolation, both socially and emotionally. They lived in a shadowy limbo, caught between the world of the living and the specter of death. And yet, some found a peculiar kind of purpose in their work, a twisted sense of duty. It wasn't just about wielding an axe. It was about enforcing the law, dispensing what they believed to be justice, however brutal. This was a time when public executions were seen as a deterrent, a necessary spectacle to maintain order and instill fear. You might say they were early practitioners of shock and awe, using the ultimate punishment to keep society's chaos at bay. Of course, there's an irony here that can't be ignored. The very people who were tasked with upholding the law often lived on its fringes, forever branded by their gruesome vocation. They were both integral to the societal structure, and yet excluded from it, a contradiction that only heightened the psychological strain. It's as if they were trapped in a medieval paradox, one where their role was both vital and vilified. This strange duality is central to understanding the psychological burden borne by these assistants. They were both actors in and observers of their grim theater, participants in a macabre dance that left little room for personal redemption. Yet despite, or perhaps because of, these challenges, many found ways to endure. They adapted, evolved, and sometimes even thrived in their peculiar niche. So, the next time you find yourself romanticizing the notion of a hardened medieval executioner, remember there was far more beneath the surface. These individuals were nuanced, complex, and often tormented by the very roles they played. They were human, after all, caught in the most inhumane of professions. And as we delve deeper into their lives, we uncover not just the history of their actions, but the very essence of their humanity, a lesson as relevant today as it was then. As we pause here, it's clear there's more to this story. The psychological impact of such a job was profound, but it also laid the groundwork for larger societal narratives about crime, punishment, and the human condition. Yet, just as the medieval executioner's assistant never truly rested. Neither does our exploration of their world. There's still much to uncover, and the echoes of the past continue to resonate, urging us to look beyond the stereotypes and see the real people behind the axe. Speaking of echoes, let's dive into the enduring legacy of medieval executioners and their assistants. These figures have managed to carve a lasting niche in our collective imagination, somewhere between the chilling and the curiously captivating. But why is it that centuries later, we're still fascinated by these morbid maestros of medieval justice? The answer lies in a heady mix of myth, pop culture, and just a dash of historical reality. First off, let's address the myth-making machine that is human nature. Executioners and their assistants have been romanticized and demonized in equal measure, often depending on who's telling the tale. In literature and film, they're frequently depicted as either shadowy villains or misunderstood anti-heroes, wielding their axes with a grim sense of duty. Take the iconic image of the hooded executioner, a trope as reliable as the damsel in distress or the noble knight. It's a visual shorthand for mystery and menace, but like most stereotypes, it oversimplifies the truth. In reality, most executioners didn't wear hoods to conceal their identities. In fact, they were often well-known figures in their communities. Franz Schmidt, whom we've mentioned before, was as much a public figure in Nuremberg as the town crier or the local blacksmith. Sure, he wasn't invited to many potlucks, but people knew his face and name. The hooded figure is more of a Hollywood invention than historical fact, a way to play up the drama and intrigue for audiences hungry for a good scare. And speaking of Hollywood, let's not forget how pop culture has shaped our perceptions. From Shakespeare's plays to Quentin Tarantino's films, executioners have always been a source of fascination. They embody the ultimate power over life and death, a concept that's both terrifying and thrilling. In cinema, they often serve as the Grim Reaper's earthly avatar, wielding their instruments of death with a mix of solemnity and spectacle. But the real medieval executioner was more bureaucrat than boogeyman, tasked with an unpleasant job that was more about civic duty than personal vendetta. Yet, as time marched on, the need for public executions dwindled. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the spectacle was losing its appeal, and society began to question the morality of such public displays. Enlightenment thinkers argued against the barbarity of public executions, prompting a slow but steady shift towards more civilized forms of punishment. The introduction of prisons and penal reform gradually rendered the executioner's role obsolete. By the 19th century, many countries had abolished public executions altogether, replacing the gallows with the gavel. But the past leaves a long shadow. Even after the gallows were dismantled, the legacy of executioners lingered in the public consciousness. They became symbols of an era when justice was swift and brutal, a time when the line between law and morality was as blurry as the horizon on a foggy day. The image of the executioner still lingers in folklore and fairy tales, a grim reminder of humanity's darker impulses. Now, let's pivot to a broader reflection on the human cost of capital punishment, a topic as relevant today as it was in medieval times. Throughout history, capital punishment has been a tool wielded by those in power to maintain order and exert control. But at what cost? For every execution, there's a ripple effect, touching the lives of families, communities, and societies as a whole. It's a stark reminder that the pursuit of justice can sometimes come at a grave expense. Today, the debate over capital punishment continues, with arguments both for and against its use. Proponents argue it serves as a deterrent, a necessary measure to protect society from its most dangerous elements. Opponents counter with ethical concerns, questioning the morality of taking a life in the name of justice. They point to the potential for wrongful convictions, the irreversible nature of the penalty, and the psychological toll it takes on those who must carry out the sentence. So, what's the final takeaway from our jaunt through the world of medieval executioners and their assistants? It's a story that reminds us of the complexity of human nature, the blurred lines between justice and cruelty, and the enduring impact of historical narratives. Executioners were more than their grim reputations. They were products of their time, caught in a system that demanded their grisly services even as it shunned their presence. As we close the book on this chapter of history, let's not forget the lessons it offers for our own time. History is more than just dates and figures. It's a mirror reflecting our own humanity, with all its flaws and virtues. The executioner's tale is a cautionary one, a reminder of the human cost of punishment and the moral dilemmas that have echoed through the ages. And while we may no longer live in a world where the executioner's axe swings freely, the questions raised by their legacy remain as relevant today as ever. So, the next time you think of medieval executioners, remember they're not just figures of fantasy. They're a reflection of the complex dance between justice and morality, a dance that continues in our own time. You know what's more tumultuous than a high school reunion? The Roman Empire in the 4th century. Seriously, if the empire had a Facebook status, it would be "It's complicated." Picture an empire that stretched from the windswept shores of Britain to the sun-drenched sands of Egypt. And yet, beneath its marble-clad glory, Rome was having something of a midlife crisis. Enter stage left. The early Christian church, the ancient world's equivalent of a scrappy garage startup, poised to become the next big thing thanks to a mix of divine favor and savvy networking. This is a tale of roads well-traveled, both literally and metaphorically, as Christianity went from a fringe movement to the official religion of an empire that was, frankly, falling apart at the seams. Let's talk roads. The Roman Empire was the original transportation mogul, boasting a network of 250,000 miles of roads, 50,000 of which were paved. That's more surface area than a modern airport runway. These weren't just any roads, though. They were meticulously engineered, with layers of stone and gravel that made the autobahn look like a dirt track. But here's the kicker. These roads were the veins and arteries that pumped Roman law, culture, and yes, Christianity, across continents. Roman roads weren't just for legions or merchants. They were like Instagram for ideas, a quick and efficient way to spread the latest trends. Now, early Christianity had a bit of a rough start. It's not like Jesus handed out bumper stickers with catchy slogans like "Honk if you love miracles." No, the message had to be whispered in the shadows and scribbled in secret. But the infrastructure set up for conquering the known world also became the perfect platform for spreading the gospel. By the time we get to the 4th century, Christianity is less of a whisper and more of a buzzword. You know, like when your friend tells you they discovered this underground band that just signed a major label deal. Here's where it gets juicy. Constantine the Great. You might know him as the guy who legalized Christianity, but let's peel back some layers. Before his conversion, Constantine was a classic Roman general with a penchant for power plays, embroiled in the empire's version of Game of Thrones. It's 312 AD, and Constantine is prepping for the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. Picture this. Constantine is outnumbered, staring down a rival army led by Maxentius, who was about as popular as a root canal. The stakes, control of Rome itself, enter the famous vision. Constantine sees a cross of light and hears the phrase in Hoc Signo Vinces, which is Latin for "in this sign you will conquer." Now, whether this was a divine message or just the ancient equivalent of pre-battle jitters, it worked. Constantine painted the Christian symbol on his soldiers' shields, and lo and behold, they won. Talk about a plot twist worthy of a Hollywood epic. This battle wasn't just a military win. It was a turning point for Christianity. Constantine's conversion was less about personal epiphany and more about political savvy. After all, aligning with the growing Christian populace was a strategic move that secured his power and set the stage for a religious revolution. The Edict of Milan in 313 AD was Constantine's bold step into the world of religious tolerance. It was like turning the empire's religious dial from a cacophony of pagan deities to a harmonious blend, with Christianity leading the choir. No more martyrdom in the Colosseum. Instead, Christians could finally build their churches without fear of an impromptu execution. This wasn't just a benevolent gesture. Constantine saw Christianity as a unifying force that could stabilize a fractured empire. He was consolidating power and faith, two things that, when combined, could move mountains, or in this case, reshape the entire Roman world. But let's get real here. Constantine's motives weren't purely spiritual. The man was a master politician. By favoring Christianity, he was tapping into a growing demographic that could bolster his rule. It's like a modern-day politician suddenly embracing social media influencers. Strategic, not coincidental. Constantine wasn't just adopting a faith. He was adopting a movement that could support his reign and ensure the longevity of the empire, even if it meant flipping the religious script. So here we are, with Constantine as the unlikely patron of a faith that started in the back alleys of Jerusalem and grew into a cornerstone of Roman identity. What we see is the power of infrastructure and ambition, with Roman roads carrying the message and a savvy ruler recognizing the winds of change. Every empire has its ups and downs, but with the rise of Christianity, the Roman Empire found a new chapter, one that would echo through the halls of history long after its political power waned. As we wrap up this first act in our tale, remember that the spread of Christianity wasn't just a miraculous event. It was a complex dance of politics, infrastructure, and human ambition. The roads of Rome carried more than just legions. They carried ideas, and those ideas, much like the empire itself, were destined to change the world. So next time you hear about the fall of Rome, think of it less as a collapse and more as a transformation. The empire didn't just fall, it evolved, and at the heart of that evolution was a faith that rode the highways of history to become a global force. As Rome evolved, Christianity found itself at the center of a medieval makeover, transitioning from spiritual underdog to political powerhouse. Enter the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. Think of it as the ancient world's version of a corporate retreat, but with less trust falls and more theological debates. Called by Constantine himself, this council was like a who's who of early Christian leaders, gathered not just to chat about the weather, but to hammer out the core tenets of the faith. The stakes were high. We're talking about defining the nature of the divine, not deciding the office coffee policy. The Council of Nicaea was essentially the Church's first major attempt at brand management. Over 300 bishops, the original influencers of their time, flocked from all corners of the empire, some traveling over 1,000 miles. These were not leisurely jaunts. We're talking weeks of travel across dusty roads and stormy seas, all to debate whether Jesus was of the same substance as God or just a really good likeness. Spoiler, they went with same substance, giving us the Nicene Creed, a statement of faith that still resided in churches today. But let's not romanticize these ecclesiastical powwows. Behind the veneer of holy discourse, there was plenty of political maneuvering. Constantine, ever the astute politician, saw Christianity as his ticket to unity and stability within his fractious empire. By officiating over the council, he wasn't just playing peacemaker. He was ensuring the church's alignment with his imperial agenda. This wasn't just a theological debate. It was a strategic alliance, a merger of sorts between church and state that would have far-reaching consequences. Fast forward a few centuries, and the church isn't just a religious institution. It's a political heavyweight. The papacy, once a humble office in Rome, became the medieval equivalent of the White House, but with more incense and fewer press briefings. Popes weren't just spiritual leaders. They were kings in all but name, ruling over the papal states and wielding influence that made European monarchs break into a nervous sweat. This power didn't just fall into their laps. It was a hard-won series of power plays, often involving alliances as strategic as any royal marriage. The church's rise to power was fueled by a cocktail of faith, politics, and economics. The medieval world wasn't just a land of knights and castles. It was a complex web of feudal obligations and economic necessities. The church, ever savvy, capitalized on this by becoming one of the largest landowners in Europe. By the 12th century, it controlled roughly a third of all land on the continent. This wasn't just real estate, this was power. Land meant wealth, and wealth meant influence. The church could levy taxes, raise armies, and build cathedrals that touched the sky, all while maintaining the moral high ground. Talk about a divine monopoly. But let's not be naive. The path to power was littered with intrigue and scandal. Popes were often embroiled in the kind of drama that would make today's reality TV look tame. Take, for example, the infamous Cadaver Synod of 897 AD, where Pope Stephen VI put his predecessor's corpse on trial. Yes, you heard that right. A dead man's skeleton was dressed up in papal robes and accused of perjury. This grotesque spectacle was less about justice and more about political revenge, highlighting the murky waters the papacy often found itself wading through. As the medieval period progressed, the church's influence grew, thanks in part to the phenomenon of crusades. These were not just holy wars. They were the medieval equivalent of geopolitical chess, with the Church as the grandmaster. From 1096 onwards, European nobles were encouraged to take up the cross and head to the Holy Land, ostensibly to reclaim it from Muslim rule, but also to assert European influence. These crusades were as much about economic gain and territorial expansion as they were about spiritual salvation. Let's not kid ourselves. Pilgrims weren't just seeking heavenly reward. They were after earthly spoils too. The Crusades also underscored the Church's ability to mobilize masses. In what was perhaps history's most ambitious crowdfunding campaign, the papacy promised indulgences, essentially get-out-of-sin-free cards, to those who joined the cause. This was a masterstroke of medieval marketing, ensuring that thousands of knights, peasants, and nobles alike took up arms under the Church's banner. It was less about piety and more about power, a testament to the Church's ability to shape destiny through faith and force. But with great power came great responsibility, or rather, great complexity. As the Church's influence spread, so did its challenges. Heresies and schisms bubbled beneath the surface, threatening to unravel the very fabric of Christendom. The Great Schism of 1054, which saw the split between the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches, was a seismic event that reverberated through the medieval world. This wasn't just a religious rift. It was a geopolitical earthquake, dividing Europe along cultural and linguistic lines that would persist for centuries. The Church's authority was further tested by the rise of powerful monarchies, eager to assert their independence from papal oversight. In England, King Henry Roman II clash with Archbishop Thomas Becket over the rights of the Church versus the Crown highlighted this tension. Becket's subsequent murder in 1170 turned him into a martyr, but it also underscored the dangerous game of power politics that the Church was playing. For every alliance the papacy forged, there was a monarch plotting to cut the strings. By the late medieval period, the Church's influence was as formidable as ever, yet it was also a house of cards, susceptible to the winds of change. As Europe edged towards the Renaissance, the seeds of Reformation were being sown, a movement that would challenge the very foundations of papal authority. But that's a story for another time. For now, suffice it to say that the Church's journey from persecuted sect to political juggernaut was anything but straightforward. It was a tale of ambition and adaptation, of faith and force, a reminder that in the grand theatre of history, the lines between the sacred and the secular are often blurred. So, next time you marvel at a medieval cathedral or ponder the power of the papacy, remember that behind the facade of faith lies a story as intricate as any tapestry. The Church's rise was built on the crossroads of belief and ambition, a testament to the enduring power of an idea to shape the world. As we pause in our narrative, one can't help but wonder how this delicate dance of power and piety will unfold. Stay tuned. There's plenty more drama in the medieval pipeline. But let's zoom in on the medieval stage where the Church's rock stars, the popes, were stealing the spotlight. Picture it, the Middle Ages, where your average pope could walk into any European court and kings would nervously clutch their crowns tighter. This wasn't just about spiritual guidance. Popes were the puppet masters of politics, pulling strings with the finesse of a maestro conducting a grand symphony. The Crusades, indulgences, and the Inquisition are the greatest hits of this era, each a chart-topping saga in its own right. Let's start with the Crusades, a series of holy wars that were as much about celestial salvation as they were about earthly spoils. From 1096 to 1291, these armed pilgrimages saw knights and peasants alike donning their mail and setting off for the Holy Land. The First Crusade was like the original blockbuster hit, drawing in a cast of thousands. It culminated in 1099 with the capture of Jerusalem, a victory that was hailed as a miracle. But let's not kid ourselves. The Crusades were less about rescuing sacred sites and more about real estate and riches. The Church promised indulgences, which were essentially spiritual fast passes to heaven to anyone who wielded a sword for Christendom. This clever marketing ploy ensured a steady stream of recruits, eager to trade their earthly struggles for eternal rewards. The Crusades were also a convenient outlet for Europe's surplus of restless knights. Think of it as history's most elaborate anger management program. Overpopulation and limited resources meant that these armored aristocrats were itching for something to do, something a bit more glamorous than just jousting at the local fair. When Pope Urban Roman II called for the First Crusade at the Council of Clermont in 1095, he wasn't just rallying troops. He was offering a solution to Europe's internal strife. Send them off to fight for glory and guard. And suddenly, the continent's surplus testosterone found a new playground. But while the Church was orchestrating these grand expeditions, it was also raking in the dough through indulgences. These spiritual IOUs were a financial goldmine. For the right price, or the right act of penance, your sins could be wiped clean. This wasn't just a religious boon. It was an economic bonanza. The Church's coffers swelled as the faithful shelled out for salvation, proving that in medieval Europe, money could indeed buy happiness, or at least a shorter stay in purgatory. Meanwhile, back home in Europe, the Inquisition was making waves. Officially launched in 1231 by Pope Gregory Roman IX, this was the Church's answer to heresy, which was spreading like a medieval meme. Heresy was the spiritual equivalent of a viral tweet gone wrong, threatening to undermine the Church's authority. The Inquisition was less about fiery interrogations and more about methodical investigations, at least at first. It was an ecclesiastical court, tasked with rooting out false beliefs and bringing the wayward back into the fold. Punishments ranged from penance to more severe measures, but here's the kicker. The Inquisition wasn't just about faith. It was also a tool for consolidating power, a way to ensure that the Church's voice was the loudest in the room. The Spanish Inquisition, which began in 1478, took things to a whole new level. It was a state-run affair, with the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, using it to unify Spain under one faith. Heretics, conversos, and anyone else who didn't fit the mold found themselves in the crosshairs. The Spanish Inquisition was infamous for its zealotry and its willingness to use torture to extract confessions. But let's not overstate its suddenness. A lot of due process was simply the Church's way of ensuring control in an increasingly fractured Europe. Amidst these turbulent times, the Church's coffers were jingling with the sweet sound of prosperity. Thanks to indulgences, tithes, and donations, the Vatican was flush with gold. This wealth was funneled into grand cathedrals and lavish art, turning cities into testaments to divine glory. St. Peter's Basilica, for instance, was a monument that took over a century to build, costing more than a few indulgences along the way. The Church wasn't just a religious institution. It was a cultural powerhouse, commissioning works from the era's greatest artists, like Michelangelo, who painted the Sistine Chapel ceiling, a masterpiece that turned heads and opened wallets. But with great wealth came the inevitable temptations of power. The papacy, often embroiled in political machinations, wasn't immune to corruption. Popes like Alexander VI, who ruled from 1492 to 1503, were known more for their courtly decadence than their saintly virtues. Alexander, a Borgia, was notorious for his nepotism and his penchant for lavish parties. His reign was a soap opera of scandal and intrigue, filled with enough drama to keep any medieval tabloid in business. Yet even amidst the decadence, the Church's influence was undeniable. It was the glue that held Europe together, a unifying force in a world divided by language, culture, and feudal loyalties. The papal court was a melting pot of ideas and innovation, a place where thinkers and theologians rubbed shoulders with the powerful and the pious. The Church was not just a bastion of faith. It was an engine of progress, driving the intellectual and cultural advancements of the age. As our medieval tale unfolds, remember that the Church's story is one of contradictions. Faith and folly, piety and power. It's a saga that continues to shape the world in ways both grand and subtle. So, as we prepare to dive into the next chapter of this ecclesiastical epic, hold onto your mitres and rosaries. There's plenty more to explore in this grand tapestry of history. Stay tuned for more tales of intrigue, ambition, and the enduring power of belief as we navigate the Church's golden age and its lasting legacy. As our medieval tale unfolds, remember that the Church's story is one of contradictions. Faith and folly, piety and power. It's a saga that continues to shape the world in ways both grand and subtle. So, as we prepare to dive into the next chapter of this ecclesiastical epic, hold onto your mitres and rosaries. There's plenty more to explore in this grand tapestry of history. Stay tuned for more tales of intrigue, ambition, and the enduring power of belief as we navigate the Church's golden age and its lasting legacy. And speaking of legacies, let's fast forward to the Renaissance and Reformation, the Church's equivalent of a roller coaster ride through a storm. This era was like the Church's midlife crisis, complete with a flashy new car, air, printing press, and a slew of existential questions. The Renaissance was all about rediscovery and rebranding, breathing life into dusty ideas with a fresh pair of lungs. But not everyone was thrilled with the Church's old-school playlist. Enter the reformers, the rebels with a cause, who were ready to remix the whole religious tracklist. Let's start with the headliner, Martin Luther. Picture this: 1517, a monk with a hammer and a knack for writing killer blog posts, or rather, theses. When Luther nailed his 95 theses to the door of the Wittenberg Castle Church, it wasn't just an act of defiance. It was the medieval equivalent of going viral. The Church's indulgence racket was in his crosshairs, and he wasn't holding back. This wasn't just a theological dispute over the price of a soul. It was a full-on assault on the Church's economic sinews. Indulgences were the Church's cash cow, and Luther was here to tip it over. But here's the twist. Luther's rebellion wasn't just about doctrine. It was a social and political powder keg waiting to explode. The printing press, that nifty gadget invented by Johannes Gutenberg in the mid-15th century, was the Church's worst nightmare. Suddenly, ideas could spread faster than the Black Plague. Luther's pamphlets were hot off the presses and into the hands of the masses. It was the democratization of information, and the Church's monopoly on knowledge was slipping through its fingers like sand. The printing press was more than just movable type. It was a revolution in ink. Before Gutenberg, books were painstakingly copied by hand, a luxury reserved for the elite. But now, with a few clanks and clicks, you could produce hundreds of copies. Imagine the surprise of those medieval scribes. It was like going from dial-up to fiber optic overnight. By 1500, there were over 1,000 printing presses in Europe, and they were churning out everything from religious texts to scandal sheets at an astonishing rate. The Reformation wasn't just Luther's show, though. It was a full-blown ensemble piece with reformers like John Calvin and Huldrych Zwingli stepping into the spotlight. Calvin, with his sharp mind and even sharper pen, took Luther's ideas and ran with them, crafting a lean, mean theological machine that emphasized predestination and a stripped-down worship style. Meanwhile, Zwingli in Zurich was busy scrapping anything that smelled too papist, from relics to rituals. The Reformation was less about minor tweaks and more about gutting the whole system and starting fresh. Let's not forget our English friends. Henry Roman VIII, the king with a penchant for matrimonial musical chairs, had his own spin on religious reform. His break from Rome was less about theology and more about personal politics, specifically his desire for a divorce that the Pope refused to grant. So what did Henry do? He pulled a fast one, declaring himself the supreme head of the Church of England. It was a bold move, with more than a hint of opportunistic flair, and it set the stage for a distinctly English brand of Protestantism. This ecclesiastical upheaval wasn't just about who's in charge. It was about the very soul of Europe. The Reformation fractured Christendom, creating a religious map as variegated as a patchwork quilt. It was a time of saints and sinners, of iconoclasts and innovators, a period where faith turned into a battlefield waged with sermons and swords alike. Economically, the Reformation was a seismic shift. The Church, with its vast land holdings and flow of indulgence cash, had been a cornerstone of medieval economies. When reformers challenged the Church's authority, they weren't just questioning spiritual doctrines. They were rattling the economic foundations of Europe itself. Monasteries were dissolved, lands confiscated, and wealth redistributed, turning the old order on its head. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Reformation was also a time of brutal conflict. The 30 Years' War, kicking off in 1618, was Europe's answer to who wants to be a religious millionaire. This wasn't a neat theological debate. It was a messy, bloody affair that left millions dead and reshaped the continent's political landscape. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 finally put an end to the carnage, but not before leaving a legacy of religious coexistence and a more fragmented Europe. Despite the chaos, the Reformation did open the door to new ideas and freedoms. It encouraged individual interpretation of the scriptures, fostering a spirit of inquiry that would eventually blossom into the Enlightenment. The Church had lost its monopoly on truth, and the consequences would ripple through history like a stone tossed into a placid pond. If the Reformation was a storm, then the Renaissance was the calm before it, a period of artistic and intellectual rebirth that saw the Church both patron and critic. The Church was a major player in the Renaissance, commissioning works from masters like Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael. But it was also a period when humanism began to chip away at the Church's absolute authority. Thinkers like Erasmus and Thomas more used wit and wisdom to question dogma, their pens cutting through the thick fog of orthodoxy. As we wrap up this installment of our ecclesiastical epic, remember that the story of the Church during the Renaissance and Reformation is one of reinvention and resilience. It's a tale of power struggles and personal convictions, where the eternal and the temporal clashed in a symphony of change. And though we've only scratched the surface, the echoes of this era continue to resonate in our modern world, a testament to the enduring power of faith and the indomitable human spirit. Keep your eyes peeled for the next chapter, where we'll dive deeper into the aftermath of this religious rebranding and the Church's ongoing journey through history's tumultuous seas. Stay tuned. There's plenty more drama to come. As we sail into the modern era, the Roman Catholic Church, that ancient juggernaut of faith and power, is faced with a world that's spinning faster than a medieval bard at a tavern dance. The Industrial Revolution is in full swing, and by the time we hit the 19th century, the Church is grappling with the kind of existential questions that would give any philosopher a run for their money. Science is making its grand entrance, and suddenly, the Church's medieval worldview is looking a bit like a dusty relic. By the 20th century, the Church finds itself in a bit of a pickle. The world's gone and gotten itself into 2 world wars. And let's be honest, the Church's role during these conflicts was a mixed bag, a cocktail of diplomacy and occasional dithering. Fast forward to 1962, and Pope John Roman XXIII decides it's high time for a reboot. Enter Vatican Roman II, the Catholic Church's update patch for a rapidly modernizing world. This wasn't just a routine software update. It was a full-on system overhaul, aiming to bridge the chasm between ancient tradition and contemporary society. Vatican Roman II was a council like no other, running from 1962 to 1965, involving over 2,000 bishops from around the world. Imagine a global conference where the agenda is nothing less than the soul of a 2-millennia-old institution. The Church was facing a congregation that was increasingly asking questions, and Vatican Roman II sought to provide answers, or at least a more accessible interface. The Council's decisions ranged from allowing Mass to be celebrated in the vernacular instead of Latin, a move that brought the faithful closer to the altar, both figuratively and literally, to a renewed focus on ecumenism, aiming to mend fences with other Christian denominations. But let's not kid ourselves. Change is hard, especially for an institution that's been around longer than most nations. Vatican Roman II was about as divisive as pineapple on pizza. Traditionalists feared that modernity would dilute the Church's teachings, while progressives saw it as a long-overdue breath of fresh air. The Council's reforms were akin to swapping a horse-drawn carriage for a shiny new automobile. Some clung to the reins, while others eagerly revved the engine. Economically, the Church was navigating a world where its once dominant financial clout was being challenged by secular states and new economic models. The Church's vast land holdings had shrunk over the centuries, and tithes were no longer a guaranteed income. In response, the Vatican became a master of adaptation, investing in real estate and businesses, and yes, even a bit of stock market savvy. The Vatican Bank, officially known as the Institute for the Works of Religion, became a key player in maintaining the Church's financial health, though it hasn't been without its own share of scandal and intrigue. Politically, the Church had to redefine its role in a post-colonial world where many nations were seeking to assert their independence from both political and religious overlords. The Church's diplomatic corps, the Holy See, operated like a well-oiled machine, establishing diplomatic relations with over 180 countries by the 21st century. This wasn't just about spiritual guidance. It was a strategic game of chess, with the Vatican positioning itself as a moral compass in a world striving for balance. As we shuffle into the 21st century, the Church continues its balancing act on the tightrope between tradition and modernity. Popes have become media-savvy figures, with Pope Francis making headlines for his humble approach and progressive stances on issues like climate change and economic inequality. The Church has embraced technology not just as a tool for evangelism, but as a platform for dialogue with a global audience. Because let's face it, even the divine needs a Twitter handle these days. But the Church's path has been anything but smooth. Scandals, particularly those involving abuse, have rocked the institution to its core, prompting soul-searching and reforms that are still unfolding. This isn't just a PR crisis. It's a moral reckoning, demanding transparency and accountability from an institution that has often cloaked itself in secrecy. Amidst these challenges, the Church's legacy remains a tapestry of influence and introspection. Its art and architecture continue to inspire awe, from the soaring spires of Notre Dame to the serene beauty of the Sistine Chapel. Its teachings and traditions, however contested, continue to shape the lives of over 1 billion Catholics worldwide. As we wrap up this historical odyssey, remember that the Church's journey is one of perpetual transformation. From its roots in the backstreets of ancient Jerusalem to its current standing as a global institution, the Catholic Church is a testament to the enduring power of faith. It's a story of resilience and reinvention, of holding firm and letting go, of tradition and transition. A saga that, like all great tales, is still being written. So, as you drift off into the land of Nod, let the echoes of the past remind you that history is not just a collection of dates and events. It is the ongoing story of humanity's quest for meaning and connection in an ever-changing world. If there was ever a time to get your head spinning with ideas, it was 18th century Europe, the Enlightenment era. A time when everyone from coffeehouse philosophers to powdered wig aristocrats thought they had the answers to life's big questions. Enter Immanuel Kant, a man whose life was as regimented as his philosophical ideas were groundbreaking. Born in 1724 in Königsberg, Prussia, today's Kaliningrad, Russia, Kant lived in a world that was part bustling trade hub, part intellectual hotbed. Yet, despite the colorful chaos of his surroundings, Kant himself was anything but chaotic. Now, let's talk punctuality. This man was so predictable that the residents of Königsberg reportedly set their watches by his afternoon walk. Legend has it, you could see Kant at exactly 3:30 p.m., strolling through his neighborhood like clockwork. But hold onto your sundials. While it's fun to imagine him as some kind of philosophical metronome, the truth is he was a bit more flexible than that. Sure, he kept a tight schedule, but he wasn't the robotic recluse some stories make him out to be. He had friends, he went to dinner parties, and yes, he even indulged in the occasional social gathering. Imagine Kant as the kind of guy who'd show up at your dinner party, discuss the nature of existence, and leave you questioning your career choices by dessert. Kant's upbringing was a curious mix of modest means and grand ideas. His father, Johann, was a harness maker, a profession not exactly synonymous with philosophical grandeur. Yet, despite the economic constraints, Kant's parents prioritized education. They sent him to the University of Königsberg, or the Albertina, as it was known, where he studied everything from mathematics to the natural sciences. The Enlightenment was all about questioning and understanding, and young Immanuel was knee-deep in it, soaking up knowledge like a Prussian sponge. Speaking of the Albertina, this place was no academic backwater. Established in 1544, it was a melting pot of ideas with a student body as diverse as its curriculum. Here, Kant was influenced by the works of Newton and Leibniz, and it's where he began developing his own ideas on metaphysics and epistemology. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. For now, it's enough to know that this early immersion in such a vibrant intellectual environment laid the groundwork for his later theories. Economically, Prussia wasn't exactly swimming in wealth during Kant's time. The state had its ups and downs, with the 7 Years' War, 1756-1763, hitting the region's prosperity like a cannonball to the hull. Despite these challenges, Königsberg remained a vital trade center. The city was a bustling port, where goods from all over Europe flowed in and out like philosophical debates in a tavern. And while Kant wasn't rolling in riches, his academic pursuits afforded him a level of comfort and stability that many of his contemporaries could only dream of. Now, about that hermit myth. Kant wasn't some lonely philosopher brooding in his study, cut off from the world. He had a vibrant social life and was part of a circle of intellectuals, including the likes of Johann Georg Hamann and Theodor Gottlieb von Hippel. These were not just drinking buddies. They were part of a lively scene that discussed everything from theology to science, challenging each other's ideas and quite likely their patience. Kant might not have been the life of the party, but he was definitely on the guest list. In debunking the myth of Kant as a hermit, we stumble upon something more intriguing, the balance he struck between the life of the mind and the world around him. Königsberg, with its winding streets and vibrant tradespeople, was as much a part of his education as the hallowed halls of the Albertina. Kant's philosophy wasn't born in isolation. It was a product of his interaction with the world, a world full of contradictions and contrasts. So, what's the takeaway here? Kant's early life was a blend of routine and revelation, of structured days and expansive ideas. His experiences in Königsberg, from the economic realities to the intellectual exchanges, shaped the foundation of his philosophical inquiries. This wasn't just a man who pondered existence from an ivory tower. He lived it, breathed it, and walked it every afternoon at precisely 3:30 p.m. Kant's story isn't just about the thoughts he had, but the world that inspired them. And as we continue our journey through his life and work, we'll find that his ideas were as much a product of his time as they were a challenge to it. And so, the stage was set for Immanuel Kant to drop a philosophical bombshell on the world. If his early life in Königsberg was a warm-up, then his major works were the main event. Fast forward to 1781, when Kant unleashed the Critique of Pure Reason. This wasn't just a book. It was an 856-page intellectual earthquake that shook the foundations of Western philosophy. Think of it as the philosophical equivalent of a blockbuster movie, only with fewer explosions and more footnotes. The Critique of Pure Reason tackled the big questions: how we perceive the world, the limits of human understanding, and what we can actually know. You know, light reading material. Kant was challenging the status quo, and he wasn't doing it quietly. He introduced concepts like the transcendental idealism, which basically argued that our experience of the world is shaped by our perceptions, not just cold, hard reality. In other words, reality is part what you see, part how your brain processes it. This was heady stuff, and it wasn't exactly a hit at the 18th century cocktail party circuit. But let's not kid ourselves into thinking Kant just sat down one afternoon and churned out this masterpiece. Oh no, the Critique of Pure Reason was a labor of love, or maybe obsession. Kant revised the book multiple times, tinkering with it like a mechanic trying to get an old car running smoothly. His perfectionism was legendary. He even issued a second edition in 1787 just to clarify a few points. You could say he was the original edit until you drop kind of guy. The man was so meticulous, he made a Swiss watch look haphazard. Now, 1788 rolled around, and Kant wasn't done yet. Enter the Critique of Practical Reason, where he introduced the world to the categorical imperative. This was Kant's way of saying, hey, here's how you should act, based on universal laws. It's the philosophical equivalent of the Golden Rule, but with more philosophical jargon and less Hallmark card sentimentality. The categorical imperative was all about moral action for its own sake, not because of some reward or fear of punishment. You know, just doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Radical right. Kant's relentless pursuit of philosophical clarity was underpinned by his distinctly Prussian work ethic. This was a guy who probably wrote "work hard, play later" in the original German. His routine was so regimented, you'd think he was a human version of a Swiss Army knife, efficient, reliable, and always on time. He'd spend mornings teaching, afternoons writing, and evenings socializing just enough to maintain his sanity. His life was a symphony of discipline, a testament to what sheer determination could achieve. But let's not romanticize Kant as some kind of solitary genius with a quill and a dream. His ideas didn't emerge in a vacuum. They were a product of his time, shaped by the intellectual currents swirling around him. The Enlightenment was all about challenging traditional authority and questioning everything from religious dogmas to political systems. Kant was right in the thick of it, adding his voice to the clamor for a more rational world. The cultural impact of Kant's work was immense. He wasn't just speaking to philosophers cloistered in ivory towers. He was addressing the very fabric of society. His ideas on morality, freedom, and reason found their way into debates on everything from law to education. Kant essentially redefined the way people thought about thinking, turning the intellectual world on its head. Of course, not everyone was on board with Kant's ideas. His work was as polarizing as pineapple on pizza. Some loved it, others couldn't stand it. Critics argued that his theories were too abstract, too disconnected from the gritty realities of everyday life. Yet, despite the controversy, Kant's influence spread like wildfire, inspiring generations of thinkers to come. In the end, Kant's legacy is a testament to the power of ideas. His relentless pursuit of truth, coupled with his meticulous work ethic, challenged the world to think deeper, to question more, and to never settle for easy answers. As we delve deeper into his life and works, we'll find that Kant wasn't just a philosopher. He was a revolution in thought, a beacon of the Enlightenment, and a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is a journey, not a destination. Stay tuned for more revelations as we continue to unravel the life and ideas of this philosophical giant. As we continue to unravel the life and ideas of this philosophical giant, it's time to broaden the canvas to include the colorful cast of Enlightenment thinkers who orbited the same intellectual sun. Enter David Hume and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, two characters who could make even the most stoic philosopher raise an eyebrow. These were the rock stars of the Enlightenment, if rock stars debated metaphysics and moral philosophy instead of headlining Coachella. Let's start with David Hume, the Scottish skeptic whose ideas on empiricism and human understanding were like a philosophical espresso shot, strong, invigorating, and occasionally stomach-churning. Hume was all about the senses. In his view, knowledge comes from experience, a concept that made him the enfant terrible of the philosophical world. He famously questioned causality, suggesting that our belief in cause and effect was more about habit than logic. It's like saying, just because the sun rises every day doesn't mean it will tomorrow. Try bringing that up at your next morning meeting and watch the chaos unfold. Kant and Hume's intellectual tango began with Kant's encounter with Hume's A Treatise of Human Nature. Hume's skepticism about human understanding shook Kant from what he described as his dogmatic slumber. Talk about a philosophical wake-up call. Hume's ideas pushed Kant to rethink his own beliefs, leading to a re-evaluation that would culminate in the critique of pure reason. Kant took Hume's empirical skepticism and grafted onto it his own brand of critical philosophy. He didn't just want to show how we know what we know. He wanted to outline the very conditions that make knowledge possible. It's like Hume handed him a puzzle, and Kant decided to rebuild the entire table it sat on. And then there was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the philosopher with the flair of a revolutionary and the temperament of a tempest. If Hume was the skeptical scientist, Rousseau was the passionate poet, romanticizing the state of nature and arguing that civilization was the root of all corruption. Rousseau's The Social Contract argued for the collective will of the people, a concept that was both radical and radicalizing in an era of monarchies and rigid class structures. Kant was captivated by Rousseau's ideas, especially those on human freedom and equality. Rousseau's assertion that man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains, resonated with Kant and influenced his own thoughts on morality and autonomy. Kant admired Rousseau's conviction that true freedom lay in moral law, not in the hedonistic pursuit of pleasure. Yet, despite the admiration, Kant's approach was less about embracing Rousseau's emotional fervor and more about grounding those ideals in rationality. While Rousseau saw emotion as a path to virtue, Kant believed moral actions required a firm foundation in reason. Let's not pretend, though, that these thinkers were all sipping tea and swapping compliments. The intellectual landscape was more like a philosophical UFC ring. Hume's skepticism and Rousseau's romanticism were often at odds with Kant's methodical approach. Kant was the kind of philosopher who'd debate you on the metaphysical implications of your breakfast choices, while Hume might question if your breakfast even exists, and Rousseau would probably romanticize the idea of foraging for it in a state of nature. The Enlightenment was a time of debate and discourse, where ideas were as likely to clash as to coalesce. Kant's meticulous, almost surgical precision often contrasted sharply with the more flamboyant styles of his contemporaries. It was a time when ideas weren't just discussed, they were dissected, challenged, and championed with fervor. This was the intellectual ecosystem that shaped Kant's work, a vibrant and sometimes volatile mix of minds and methods. Yet, for all the disagreements, these interactions were the lifeblood of Enlightenment thought. The debates between Kant, Hume, and Rousseau weren't just academic exercises. They were the building blocks of modern philosophy, laying the groundwork for everything from existentialism to cognitive science. They were wrestling with the big questions: what it means to know, to be, to act, and their dialogues formed the crucible from which modern Western thought would emerge. In debunking the myth of Kant as a solitary genius, we find a richer, more nuanced portrait of a man deeply engaged with the world around him. His interactions with other thinkers weren't just intellectual sparring matches. They were essential components of his philosophical development. Kant wasn't just responding to the ideas of others. He was refining them, challenging them, and integrating them into his own vast intellectual tapestry. So, what's the takeaway here? The Enlightenment wasn't just a period of great ideas. It was a period of great conversation. Kant, Hume, and Rousseau weren't just thinkers. They were interlocutors in a grand dialogue, a conversation that would shape the trajectory of Western thought for centuries to come. And as we delve deeper into Kant's life, we'll see that these exchanges were not mere footnotes in his intellectual journey, but vital chapters in the story of his philosophical evolution. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the life and ideas of Immanuel Kant, unraveling the threads of his thought and the vibrant tapestry of the Enlightenment that surrounds it. The story isn't over yet, and there are more revelations to come in the next chapter of this philosophical odyssey. As Kant's philosophical legacy began to spread like wildfire across Europe, his later years saw him evolve from a local Königsberg celebrity into a continental intellectual heavyweight. His ideas were the stuff of academic salons and heated debates, not just in Prussia, but in the glittering intellectual arenas of Paris, London, and beyond. This wasn't just a philosopher with a quill and a penchant for punctuality. Kant was becoming the rock star of rationality, his works dissected by future giants of thought like Hegel and Schopenhauer, who either admired his genius or relished in critiquing his theories. Now, let's dive into the myth-busting pool once again. Was Kant really the stern, humorless thinker some portray him to be? Spoiler alert, not quite. Sure, his works might read like the philosophical equivalent of a marathon. Kant himself was known for a dry wit that could rival any modern-day stand-up comedian. In his correspondence, he often displayed a keen sense of humor. Take, for instance, a letter to a friend where he poked fun at himself, joking that he was so busy with his thoughts that he might forget to eat if not reminded. Imagine Kant as the kind of guy who'd drop a philosophical zinger at a dinner party, leaving everyone laughing, or perhaps scratching their heads in confusion. And speaking of dinner parties, his network of friends was a testament to his engaging personality. Kant wasn't just a solitary figure locked away in an ivory tower. Instead, he was part of a vibrant intellectual community. His close friendship with Johann Georg Hamann, known as the Magus of the North, was a particularly fascinating dynamic. Hamann, with his mystical, almost cryptic style, was the yin to Kant's rigorously rational yang. Their debates were legendary, a blend of Enlightenment clarity clashing with existential mystery. It was like watching a philosophical tango, with Kant's steady steps countered by Hamann's unpredictable moves. But Kant's influence wasn't limited to the cozy confines of Königsberg. His ideas began to seep into the very fabric of political thought. The concepts of freedom and morality that Kant so meticulously laid out in his works resonated with the burgeoning movements of democratic thought across Europe. His notion of the categorical imperative wasn't just food for philosophical thought. It was a call to moral arms, encouraging people to act according to universal laws of reason. This was a time when monarchs ruled with absolute power, yet Kant's philosophy suggested a world where reason and moral autonomy could challenge the status quo. Imagine Kant as the philosophical whisperer behind the scenes, quietly nudging society toward ideas of liberty and justice. Even as his fame grew, Kant remained rooted in the practical realities of his world. He was keenly aware of the economic and social tides that shaped his environment. This was, after all, a period of significant change in Europe, with revolutions brewing and social structures shifting. The French Revolution of 1789, for instance, was a seismic event that echoed across the continent, and while Kant was cautious in his public endorsements, his writings subtly championed the Enlightenment ideals of liberty and equality. He saw the potential for reason to guide human progress, even if the road was fraught with turmoil and upheaval. In debunking the myth of Kant as a dour, detached philosopher, we find a man deeply engaged with the world around him. His letters reveal a lighter side, his friendships show a man immersed in lively debate, and his works reflect a thinker unafraid to challenge the era's most pressing issues. Kant's later years were a period of synthesis, where his ideas continued to evolve and influence, shaping not only his contemporaries, but setting the stage for future philosophical revolutions. Consider the legacy of Kant's ideas on freedom. His philosophy planted the seeds for later political theories that would champion individual rights and democracy. The notion that each person has intrinsic worth and the capacity for moral decision-making was radical for its time, and it inspired later thinkers who would push these ideas even further. Kant's influence reached across the centuries, echoing in the works of figures like John Rawls, who would take Kantian ethics and apply them to modern debates on justice. And let's not forget the cultural impact of Kant's work. His influence wasn't confined to the halls of academia. It seeped into literature, art, and even music. The Romantic movement, with its emphasis on individual emotion and the sublime, found an unexpected ally in Kant's aesthetics. His exploration of beauty and the sublime in Critique of Judgment resonated with artists and writers seeking to capture the ineffable through their work. Kant might not have been composing symphonies, but his philosophical notes played a key role in the cultural composition of the time. As Kant's ideas spread, so too did the misconceptions about his character. Sure, he was disciplined, almost to the point of obsession, but his life was rich with intellectual curiosity and social engagement. He wasn't just the stern face on the cover of a philosophy textbook. He was a vibrant part of an evolving world, contributing to the conversations that would shape the future. So, what's the takeaway here? Kant's later years were a period of expansion and influence, where his ideas took on a life of their own, shaping the course of philosophical and political thought. His reputation as a stern, humorless thinker is challenged by the warmth and wit found in his personal interactions. Kant wasn't just a philosopher. He was a human being with a keen sense of humor, a deep commitment to reason, and a profound impact on the world around him. As we continue to explore his life and ideas, we'll uncover even more layers to this complex figure, leaving no stone unturned in our quest to understand the man behind the philosophy. Stay tuned for more revelations in the next chapter of this philosophical journey. While Kant's later years saw his ideas moving from Königsberg's quaint cobblestones to the swirling urban centers of Europe, they also began to transcend the immediate intellectual debates of his time, seeping into the deeper strata of Western thought. This wasn't just about who could win an argument at the next salon gathering. It was about reshaping the very way people thought about humanity and its place in the universe. Kant's philosophy was kind of like that black coffee you begrudgingly sip in the morning. It wakes you up, makes you question your life choices, and yet somehow you can't imagine functioning without it. Let's get one thing straight. Kant wasn't just the philosophical equivalent of a one-hit wonder. Sure, his Critique of Pure Reason gets all the headlines, but his other works, like Critique of Practical Reason and Critique of Judgment, were equally pivotal, forming a kind of philosophical trinity that would influence everything from existentialism to the intricacies of modern ethics. Kant essentially built a framework that allowed thinkers to dissect human experience with the precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel, or maybe a really sharp quill. Now, if you've ever heard someone say, "I think, therefore I am," you've dipped your toes into Cartesian waters, courtesy of René Descartes. Kant, however, was more interested in the machinery behind the thinking. He questioned how our minds process information, suggesting that we don't just passively absorb the world like philosophical sponges. Instead, we actively shape it, using a set of inherent structures that help us make sense of the chaos. It's like saying, I think. Therefore I filter reality through my mental kaleidoscope. A bit wordy for a bumper sticker, but you get the idea. Kant's influence extended far beyond philosophy. His ideas on autonomy and morality found a surprising ally in the realms of political theory and legal frameworks. Consider his categorical imperative as the philosophical backbone of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Adopted in 1948, this document echoed Kant's vision of universal moral laws, enshrining the notion that every individual possesses inherent dignity. Kant wasn't just writing for his contemporaries. He was laying the groundwork for the 20th century battles for civil rights and international justice. And speaking of battles, Kant's ideas also played a role in the ideological skirmishes of the 19th century. His philosophy became a touchstone for both conservatives and revolutionaries. In a way, Kant's thought was like a philosophical Rorschach test. Everyone saw what they wanted to see. Conservatives admired his emphasis on duty and moral law, while radicals latched onto his ideas of autonomy and freedom. It's like trying to find a favorite tune in a complex symphony. You can find something for every taste if you listen closely enough. Now, let's talk about the myth of Kant as some kind of philosophical fortress, inaccessible and unyielding. Sure, his writing style could be denser than a lead balloon, but beneath those layers of intricate prose lay ideas that were, and still are, incredibly human. Kant grappled with the big existential questions. What is the nature of freedom? What can we truly know? How should we act? And he did so with a sincerity that resonates today. His work wasn't just for the ivory tower elite. It was a call to every thinking person to engage with the world in a more meaningful way. Kant's impact didn't just stop with the Enlightenment. Fast forward a century or two, and you'll find his fingerprints all over modern philosophy. Existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus took Kant's ideas about autonomy and freedom and ran with them, exploring the absurdities of human existence with a fervor that would have made Kant's own head spin. Even in the realms of cognitive science, Kant's legacy looms large. His insights into how we perceive and process the world laid the groundwork for contemporary discussions about the mind and consciousness. But let's bust another myth while we're here. The idea that Kant was some kind of isolated genius, untouched by the practical realities of his time. Sure, he wasn't storming the Bastille or drafting constitutions, but Kant was keenly aware of the political and economic currents shaping his world. In fact, his philosophy is deeply entwined with the social upheavals of his era, offering a blueprint for navigating the complexities of power, justice, and human rights. His emphasis on reason and universal laws offered a counterpoint to the chaos and uncertainty of revolutionary change, providing a kind of moral compass for a world in flux. Kant's ideas on ethics and morality have continued to shape the way we think about right and wrong. His emphasis on intention and universal principles challenges us to consider not just the consequences of our actions, but the motivations behind them. It's a philosophy that demands we look beyond the surface, grappling with the deeper, often uncomfortable truths about what it means to live a good life. In a world where quick fixes and easy answers often reign supreme, Kant's insistence on rigorous moral reasoning is more relevant than ever. And let's not overlook Kant's contributions to our understanding of aesthetics and beauty. His exploration of the sublime and the beautiful in critique of judgment opened up new avenues for artists, writers, and musicians to explore the ineffable. Kant's philosophy of art wasn't about rigid rules. It was about the transformative power of beauty to elevate the human spirit. He saw art as a way to bridge the gap between the empirical and the transcendental, providing a glimpse into realms beyond the mundane. It's a notion that continues to inspire creators across all mediums, from Monet's impressionist landscapes to the soul-stirring symphonies of Beethoven. So, if you're wondering how Kant's legacy fits into our 21st century world, consider this. His ideas challenge us to think deeply, act morally, and appreciate beauty in all its forms. He may not have had the answers to every question, but he showed us how to ask the right ones. In a time when soundbites often pass for wisdom, Kant's call for intellectual rigor and moral clarity is a breath of fresh air, or perhaps a cold splash of philosophical reality. In conclusion, Kant wasn't just a thinker of his time. He was a thinker for all time. His philosophy invites us to explore the intricacies of human existence, to grapple with the ethical dilemmas that define our age, and to seek out the beauty that elevates our lives. As we navigate the complexities of the modern world, Kant's ideas remind us that the pursuit of knowledge and understanding is an ongoing journey, a journey that demands curiosity, courage, and a touch of humility. So next time you find yourself pondering life's big questions or caught in a moral quandary, channel a bit of Kantian spirit. Embrace the challenge of critical thinking, seek out the universal in the particular, and never shy away from the pursuit of truth. Because in the end, Kant's legacy isn't about the answers he provided. It's about the questions he inspired us to ask. And that, dear friends, is the true essence of the Enlightenment, a legacy that continues to illuminate the path forward, guiding us toward a more thoughtful, reasoned, and compassionate world. In the grand tapestry of history, the Byzantine Empire is that friend who always manages to look good in every photo, regardless of the chaos happening around them. Rising from the ashes of the Roman Empire's eastern half like a phoenix with a penchant for Greek Orthodox Christianity, the Byzantine Empire didn't just survive. It thrived and schmoozed its way into the annals of Eastern European history with the finesse of a medieval socialite. So, what's the big deal about the Byzantines anyway? Well, let's start with their capital, Constantinople. Founded by Emperor Constantine in 330 AD, this city was the medieval version of New York City, minus the skyscrapers, but with way more mosaics. Positioned strategically between Europe and Asia, Constantinople was the ultimate hub for trade. Picture it as the Amazon Prime of luxury goods, but instead of 2-day shipping, think of it as more of a give or take a few months, depending on the weather and occasional pirate attacks scenario. The city became a melting pot of cultures, languages, and currencies, with bustling markets that could rival any modern-day Wall Street trading floor. Constantinople's economic prowess was legendary, and for good reason. It was the terminus of the Silk Road, that famous ancient trade route that wound through Asia like a particularly lucrative game of connect the dots. Silk, spices, precious stones, and other luxuries flowed into the city, making it the go-to destination for anyone looking to make a splash in the high society of the medieval world. And just like today's influencers flaunting their latest haul, the Byzantines knew how to flaunt their wealth. They minted their own coins, the solidus, which became the gold standard of the medieval economy, much like the dollar is today. Talk about making it rain. But the Byzantines weren't just about trade and bling. They were also political maestros, playing the diplomatic game with a level of sophistication that would make Machiavelli nod in approval. Forget Game of Thrones. The Byzantines were all about the game of taxes. Their strategy was simple yet genius. Instead of conquering lands and dealing with the messy aftermath, they preferred to influence and extract tribute. It's like they invented the concept of the subscription box. Pay us a little each year, and you get to keep your lands and titles. Who knew medieval diplomacy could be so avant-garde? This approach worked wonders in Eastern Europe. The Byzantines wooed Slavic and Bulgar tribes with a combination of religious conversion, strategic marriage alliances, and just enough military muscle to remind everyone who was boss. The Byzantine emperors were like the original influencers, spreading Eastern Orthodox Christianity throughout the region, one baptism at a time. And let's not forget about Cyril and Methodius, the two brothers who basically invented the Slavic alphabet. These guys were the original linguists, creating an entirely new script to help spread the word of the Byzantine Church, who says you can't reinvent the alphabet wheel. Now, before we get too starry-eyed, let's debunk a few myths. The Byzantine Empire wasn't all glittering mosaics and diplomatic soirees. Behind the scenes, it was a hotbed of intrigue, backstabbing, and power struggles that would make even the most seasoned political strategist break into a sweat. Emperors were deposed with alarming regularity. 42 out of the 88 Byzantine emperors met an untimely end, thanks to everything from poison to a good old-fashioned coup. It's like a medieval version of Survivor, but with even higher stakes and no immunity idols. And despite their prowess in diplomacy, the Byzantines weren't invincible. Their influence in Eastern Europe waxed and waned, subject to the whims of ambitious neighbors and rival empires. The Bulgars, the Rus, and the Ottoman Turks all had their eyes on Constantinople at various points, each hoping to claim a piece of the Byzantine pie. Yet, through it all, the Byzantines managed to hold on, adapting to each new challenge with a resilience that was nothing short of remarkable. In the grand scheme of things, the Byzantine Empire was a complex beast, equal parts glamorous and gritty, innovative and traditional. Its legacy in Eastern Europe is a testament to the power of culture, religion, and sheer tenacity. So next time you hear the term Byzantine, remember, it's not just a synonym for complicated. It's a reminder of an empire that danced on the edge of chaos and somehow made it look effortless. Now, let's wade into the Byzantine Empire's grand cultural exchange program, a kind of ancient soft power maneuver that would make even the savviest modern diplomat green with envy. We're talking about the spread of Orthodox Christianity, a religious influencer campaign that used all the bells and whistles, quite literally, to win over hearts and souls across Eastern Europe. At the heart of this campaign was the Byzantine Church, a well-oiled machine of religious pomp and circumstance. Picture grand ceremonies with enough incense to make your eyes water and gold icons gleaming from every corner. These weren't your average Sunday services. They were divine pageants. In a world where the average villager's idea of opulence was a new pair of shoes, the Byzantines knew that nothing screamed divine truth like a good bit of holy bling. And boy, did they deliver. The Byzantines had a knack for miracle claims too, finding divine signs in everything from the weather to the alignment of stars. Miracles became their version of viral content, spreading through the region like spiritual wildfire. But wait, it wasn't just about the glitz. Orthodox Christianity came packaged with a compelling narrative, one that promised eternal salvation, a comforting thought in a world where life was often nasty, brutish, and short. And let's face it, when your biggest existential threat was marauding invaders or the next bout of plague, the promise of a heavenly afterlife was a pretty solid deal. So, how did this all translate to Eastern Europe? The Byzantines courted leaders like Prince Vladimir of Kiev, who, in 988 AD, was baptized and ordered a mass conversion of his people. This wasn't just a spiritual awakening, it was a strategic alliance. By aligning with Byzantium, Eastern European leaders gained access to Byzantine trade networks, military support, and a cultural alliance. It was less about spiritual enlightenment and more about geopolitical maneuvering, a shrewd chess game where religion was the queen that could make all the right moves. Now, let's talk about Cyril and Methodius, the dynamic duo of the 9th century who went on an epic road trip to the Slavic lands. These two brothers weren't just missionaries, they were cultural architects. They created the Glagolitic alphabet, the precursor to the Cyrillic script, specifically designed to give the Slavic peoples their own written language. This was a genius branding move that would impress even the most seasoned marketer today. By translating religious texts into the local tongue, they made the Byzantine brand of Christianity accessible, relatable, and most importantly, sticky. The Cyrillic script wasn't just a linguistic breakthrough, it was a cultural bridge, allowing Slavic nations to write their own histories and laws rather than borrowing from Latin or Greek texts. It was like handing them the keys to their own cultural destiny, and they drove it with gusto. This wasn't just about spreading religious doctrine. It was about creating a shared cultural and political identity that could stand toe-to-toe with Western Europe. Of course, not everything was smooth sailing. The Byzantines were dealing with a complex mosaic of tribes and emerging states, each with its own agenda and ambitions. The Rus, for example, were a formidable force in their own right, with a penchant for trading and raiding that would make any Viking proud. The Byzantine influence ebbed and flowed, sometimes as strong as the current of the Dnieper River, other times as tenuous as a spider's web. And there were hiccups. The Great Schism of 1054, a religious divide that split Christianity into Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic branches, was a major plot twist. It wasn't just about theological disagreements. It was a power struggle, pure and simple. The Byzantines found themselves at odds with Rome, each side excommunicating the other like a pair of squabbling siblings. This schism solidified the cultural divide between Eastern and Western Europe, creating a rift that would last for centuries. Yet, through it all, the Byzantine Empire continued to be a beacon of culture and religion, its influence casting long shadows into the lands of Eastern Europe. The ripple effects of their cultural exchanges are still felt today, from the Orthodox churches that dart the landscape to the Cyrillic script that fills the pages of countless books. So, while the Byzantine Empire may have danced on the edge of chaos, they were also master choreographers, orchestrating a cultural symphony that resonated across Eastern Europe. As we pull back the curtain on this chapter of history, it's clear that the Byzantines were more than just a footnote. They were the headline act in a story of faith, power, and cultural evolution. And as we move forward, there's more to uncover about the lasting legacy of this fascinating empire. Stay tuned, because the Byzantine tale is far from over. As the Byzantine tale continues to spin its intricate web, let's pivot to the empire's military prowess, or, at times, the lack thereof. The Byzantine military strategy was essentially the Swiss Army knife of its time. Versatile, multifaceted, and always ready to flip open a new tactic. Yet, unlike the myth of an undefeated juggernaut that some textbooks might suggest, the Byzantines had their fair share of missteps and outright blunders. First, let's talk tactics. The Byzantines weren't fans of the charge in screaming and hope for the best approach. No, they preferred to fight smart, not hard. Their military manuals, like the Strategicon, were basically the medieval equivalent of Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Written under Emperor Maurice in the late 6th century, it read like a field guide for the discerning commander, covering everything from troop formations to psychological warfare. These guys didn't just show up to battle, they practically hosted a seminar. Yet, for all their strategic brilliance, the Byzantines sometimes found themselves outmaneuvered. Take the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, a classic case of overconfidence meeting harsh reality. Facing the Seljuk Turks, the Byzantines underestimated their foe, leading to a catastrophic defeat that saw Emperor Romanos Roman IV Diogenes captured. It's the kind of blunder that makes you question if they skipped their morning coffee, or perhaps a crucial chapter in their own manual. This loss punched a gaping hole in Byzantine defenses and marked the beginning of the end for their control over Anatolia. So much for that ironclad reputation. But wait, there's a twist in the tale. Enter the Varangian Guard. Picture this, a band of Norse warriors, far from their Scandinavian fjords, serving as the Byzantine emperor's personal bodyguards. It's like the plot of a Hollywood blockbuster, except it was very much real. Originally mercenaries from Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, these Viking-sterned Byzantine elite troops were the empire's muscle for hire, offering a unique blend of ferocity and loyalty. They also had a nice side hustle, bringing back the latest Scandi trends, like axes and ale, to Constantinople. Forget IKEA. These guys were the original Nordic influencers. The Varangian Guard became famous for their unyielding loyalty, a rare commodity in the Byzantine court where betrayal was practically a sport. When Emperor Basil Roman II faced internal revolts and external threats, it was the Varangians who stood by him, their battle axes gleaming and ready for action. Their role was not just ceremonial. They were the emperor's enforcers, the medieval equivalent of a presidential secret service with a penchant for pillaging. And unlike some of the less reliable Byzantine troops, the Varangians were known for their straightforward, no-nonsense approach to warfare. Loyalty, check. Fearsome reputation, double check. Of course, the presence of these northern warriors was more than just a military decision. It was a statement, a flex of Byzantine soft power that said, look who we've got on our side. It was a strategic alliance that sent ripples across Eastern Europe, as the Varangian stories of Byzantine wealth and splendor trickled back to their homelands. Picture them sitting around a fire, regaling their fellow Norsemen with tales of Constantinople's golden domes and bustling markets, planting the seeds of envy and admiration. It was cultural exchange at its finest, albeit with a side of conquest. Yet, for all the Byzantine ingenuity in diplomacy and military alliances, they couldn't escape the gravitational pull of political entropy. One minute they were on top of the world. The next, they were scrambling to hold their ground. The empire's interactions with Eastern Europe were a delicate dance, a mix of alliances and hostilities that required a deft hand and a keen eye for opportunity. It's like playing chess on a board where the pieces could suddenly switch sides. Take the First Bulgarian Empire, for example. Initially a formidable rival, it was eventually brought to heel by Basil Roman II, known affectionately, or not so affectionately, as the Bulgar Slayer. After a series of campaigns that spanned nearly 2 decades, Basil managed to annex Bulgaria in 1018. But this victory was hard-won and came at a steep cost, both in resources and manpower. It was less a glorious triumph and more a testament to Byzantine stubbornness. Despite their eventual conquest of Bulgaria, it wasn't all smooth sailing. The Byzantines had to balance military might with diplomatic savvy, often resorting to strategic marriages and alliances to keep the peace. This wasn't just about expanding borders. It was a chess game played with armies, treaties, and sometimes a well-placed bribe. In the broader scheme of Byzantine military escapades, the empire's ability to adapt was both its strength and its Achilles' heel. They could pivot from siege warfare to naval battles with surprising agility, thanks to their secret weapon, Greek fire. This fearsome incendiary weapon turned naval skirmishes into fiery spectacles, making even the most seasoned sailor think twice before engaging a Byzantine fleet. Yet, for all its pyrotechnic prowess, Greek fire wasn't enough to guarantee long-term dominance. The Byzantines' reliance on mercenaries, like the Varangian Guard, also highlighted a critical vulnerability. The empire's own troops were sometimes less reliable than the hired help. This reliance on foreign warriors was a double-edged sword. While it provided a temporary boost in military strength, it also underscored the empire's struggle to field a robust, native army. So, while the Byzantine Empire often appeared monolithic and mighty, it was in reality a patchwork quilt of alliances and shifting loyalties. This complex web of relationships was both its strength and its downfall, creating a narrative rich in power plays and political gambits. The myth of Byzantine invincibility is just that, a myth. The reality was a constant juggling act, a high-wire performance where one false step could spell disaster. As we delve deeper into the Byzantine saga, remember, behind every glittering mosaic and grand ceremony was an empire fiercely battling its own fragility. The tale of Byzantine military endeavors, like the empire itself, is one of resilience and reinvention. And with each chapter, the story unfolds with new twists, turns, and the occasional Scandinavian surprise. Stay tuned, because the Byzantine epic is far from its curtain call. While the Byzantine Empire was busy orchestrating a military and cultural symphony that echoed across Eastern Europe, they didn't just stop at swinging axes and religious conversions. Oh no, they had another trick up their imperial sleeve: economic and legal innovations. Enter the Justinian Code, a legal tour de force that tried to make sense of the Roman legal chaos, a bit like organizing a century's worth of receipts into a coherent tax return. The Justinian Code, or Corpus Juris Civilis, was the brainchild of Emperor Justinian, in the 6th century. This guy was basically the Marie Kondo of ancient laws, sifting through centuries of contradictory edicts and opinions to spark legal joy. He and his team of jurist wizards distilled the sprawling mass of Roman laws into a streamlined system that didn't just influence Byzantium, but laid down the legal groundwork for much of Europe. It was as if Justinian had taken every ancient law book and played a game of legal Tetris, trying to fit them into a neat, cohesive stack without leaving any gaps. And let's be real, there were a lot of gaps. What makes the Justinian Code so remarkable is its longevity and influence. Even after the Byzantine Empire faded into the annals of history, the code lived on, seeping its way into the legal systems of emerging European states. It was like the ultimate legal meme, getting shared and reshared through the centuries, shaping civil law traditions across the continent. If you're ever caught in a debate about the origins of modern legal systems, just remember, Justinian's Code is the granddaddy of them all. However, this wasn't just a legal tidying-up exercise. It was a statement of imperial ambition, a bid to centralize authority and assert control over a vast and diverse empire. Think of it as Justinian's way of saying, hey, we're more than just pretty mosaics and fancy churches. We have rules, too. The Code was a powerful tool for unifying the empire under a single legal framework, reinforcing the notion that the Byzantine brand was about order and sophistication, even amid chaos. Meanwhile, in the realm of economics, Byzantium was crafting trade agreements as intricate as any modern-day corporate merger. Byzantine Empire was a commercial powerhouse, with trade networks stretching from the Mediterranean to the furthest reaches of the Silk Road. Constantinople, their glittering capital, was the beating heart of this trade empire, a city where East met West in a glorious cacophony of languages, goods, and currencies. Byzantine trade agreements were no simple handshake deals. They involved layers of negotiation, tariffs, and clauses that would make a modern lawyer reach for their coffee. The Byzantines were masters of economic diplomacy, using trade as a tool to build alliances, secure peace, and occasionally exert a little pressure on their neighbors. It was a delicate balancing act, a tightrope walk where one misstep could lead to economic disaster. One standout example of Byzantine trade prowess was their monopoly on silk production. Silk was the medieval equivalent of the iPhone, a luxury item everyone wanted but few could afford. The Byzantines, ever the savvy entrepreneurs, managed to smuggle silkworm eggs out of China in the 6th century, effectively breaking the Chinese monopoly on silk. This was industrial espionage at its finest, and it paid off handsomely. By controlling silk production, the Byzantines not only secured a lucrative source of income, but also gained a powerful bargaining chip in their dealings with other states. The Byzantine economy wasn't just about flashy luxury goods, though. They were also agricultural innovators, developing sophisticated irrigation systems and crop rotation methods that boosted productivity. In a world where famine was a constant threat, this was a big deal. The empire's ability to feed its population and maintain a stable food supply was crucial to its longevity and influence. It was less about the bling and more about the bread, literally. But as with all empires, the Byzantine economic machine wasn't without its flaws. Inflation, particularly in the later years, was a persistent problem. The solidus, once the gold standard of medieval currency, gradually lost its luster as the empire debased its currency to pay for military campaigns and other expenses. It's a tale as old as time. Too many coins chasing too few goods leads to prices rocketing sky high. In Eastern Europe, Byzantine trade and legal innovations left a lasting impact. The Rus, Bulgars, and other Eastern European entities were eager to tap into the Byzantine economic network, adopting aspects of Byzantine law and trade practices. This wasn't just a case of cultural admiration. It was a pragmatic decision driven by the desire for economic growth and stability. The Byzantines, with their shiny coins and legal acumen, were a model to emulate. Yet, the relationship between Byzantium and Eastern Europe was complex, often resembling a dance with one partner leading and the other trying to keep up. The Byzantines provided the blueprint, but Eastern European states had to adapt it to fit their own unique contexts. This wasn't a one-size-fits-all situation. It was more like a bespoke tailoring job, with each state picking and choosing the elements that suited their needs. As the Byzantine influence spread, so too did the myths and legends surrounding them. The empire was often romanticized as a bastion of civility in a barbaric world, a narrative that glossed over the grittier realities of Byzantine life. It was an empire of contrasts, where grandeur and squalor coexisted, and where the glittering surface often hid darker undercurrents. But that's the beauty of history, isn't it? It's never as simple as it seems. So, as we weave through the Byzantine tapestry, remember that behind every gleaming dome and legal triumph was an empire grappling with its own contradictions. The Byzantines were both architects of their own destiny and prisoners of their own making, a paradox that makes their story all the more compelling. As we move forward, there's still much to unravel about the Byzantine legacy, so stay tuned. This tale is far from over. As we move forward, there's still much to unravel about the Byzantine legacy, so let's strap in for the final act of this historical epic. The Byzantine Empire, with its glittering mosaics and labyrinthine politics, was like that old favorite playlist, always there, occasionally forgotten, but never truly obsolete. Sure, it didn't end with a dramatic mic drop. Instead, it faded out, a slow Wi-Fi connection, buffering its way through history, until the signal finally cut out in 1453 when the Ottomans took over Constantinople. But oh, what a signal it was, influencing Eastern Europe long after the empire's last Byzantine chant echoed through Hagia Sophia. First, let's chat about religion. The Byzantines were like the original social media influencers, except instead of likes and shares, they were all about baptisms and conversions. The spread of Eastern Orthodox Christianity was more than just a spiritual movement. It was a cultural revolution. The Byzantines exported everything from liturgical practices to architectural styles, giving Eastern Europe a new religious identity that still resonates today. Just look at the onion domes of Russian churches or the frescoed walls of Serbian monasteries. They're Byzantine signatures, bold and unmistakable. But this wasn't just about ornate churches and divine liturgies. Religion was a political tool, a way to unify diverse tribes under a single spiritual banner. The Byzantines knew that faith could be as powerful as any army, and they wielded it with finesse. Prince Vladimir of Kiev's conversion in 988 AD wasn't just a personal epiphany. It was a geopolitical masterstroke, cementing alliances and opening trade routes. The Byzantine brand of Christianity provided a framework for governance and law, a template for emerging Eastern European states to emulate. It was like handing them the keys to a cultural kingdom, and boy, did they run with it. Yet, as with any influencer campaign, there were hiccups. The Great Schism of 1054 wasn't just a theological spat. It was a seismic shift, a divide that left Eastern and Western Christianity glaring at each other from opposite sides of the metaphorical room. This split solidified the Byzantine influence in Eastern Europe, creating a distinct religious identity that set it apart from its Roman Catholic neighbors. It was the ultimate case of you do you, with the Byzantines doubling down on their unique cultural and religious practices. Now, let's not forget about the legal and governance legacy. The Justinian Code was more than just a legal handbook. It was a blueprint for civilization. It laid the groundwork for civil law systems across Europe, its principles echoing through the corridors of power long after Byzantium itself had fallen. This wasn't just about laws. It was about order, stability, and the rule of law, a powerful legacy in a world often teetering on the brink of chaos. Eastern European states borrowed from this legal template, adapting it to fit their own needs and ensuring that the Byzantine influence lingered in their courtrooms and chancelleries. Culturally, the Byzantines were the tastemakers of their time, setting trends that would ripple across Eastern Europe. From art to architecture, their influence was profound. Byzantine iconography, with its gold leaf and solemn saints, became a staple of Eastern Orthodox religious art. The Byzantine style was a statement, a visual language that communicated power, piety, and prestige. It was like the haute couture of the medieval world, with Eastern European artists and architects eagerly adopting these styles to signal their sophistication and connection to the imperial center. Economically, the Byzantine Empire was a giant, a commercial hub that connected East and West. Its trade networks were the arteries of medieval commerce, pumping goods and wealth across continents. Even as the empire's political power waned, its economic influence endured. Eastern European states were keen to tap into these networks, forging trade agreements and alliances that would bolster their own economies. The Byzantine legacy in trade was a testament to the empire's enduring allure, a reminder that while power may fade, wealth and commerce have a way of sticking around. So, what does all this mean for the grand narrative? The Byzantine Empire was more than just an ancient superpower. It was a cultural and religious beacon whose light still shines, albeit from a different angle. Its legacy in Eastern Europe is a tapestry of religion, law, art, and commerce, a complex weave that speaks to the empire's multifaceted influence. This wasn't just about the past. It was about laying the foundations for the future, about shaping the identities and trajectories of nations that would rise long after Byzantium had fallen. And here's the kicker. While the Byzantines themselves may have been swept away by the tides of history, their influence is like an old operating system, still running in the background, shaping everything from religious practices to legal codes. It's a testament to the power of ideas and culture, a reminder that empires may crumble, but their legacies can endure, like echoes in the corridors of time. As we pull the curtain on this Byzantine saga, let's remember that behind the grand facades and intricate mosaics was an empire of contradictions and resilience. The Byzantines were masters of reinvention, navigating the shifting sands of politics and power with a deftness that remains impressive. Their story is one of survival, adaptation, and influence, a narrative that continues to captivate and inspire. So next time you see a golden icon or hear a haunting chant, spare a thought for the Byzantine Empire. the ancient influencer whose legacy refuses to fade into obscurity. Mesopotamia, around 2334 BCE, was a bit like a family reunion you didn't want to attend, full of squabbling relatives, or in this case, city-states, each convinced they were the rightful heir to the family throne. This was the Fertile Crescent, where the land was lusher than a green smoothie in a hipster cafe, and the rivers Tigris and Euphrates flowed like the ancient world's version of a luxury spa. But rather than a Zen garden, this area was more of a battlefield. The city-states of Uruk, and Lagash, among others, were forever locked in a cycle of bickering that made a soap opera feud look like a friendly disagreement over the TV remote. These city-states were the original frenemies, constantly vying for supremacy in a landscape that was as resource-rich as it was conflict-prone. The irony is that while they were fighting for dominance, they were also innovating at a pace that would make Silicon Valley blush. We're talking the wheel, cuneiform writing, and ziggurats that towered over the cities like ancient skyscrapers. This was the Bronze Age, after all, and metallurgy was the name of the game, though instead of crafting smart gadgets, they were busy forging weapons for the next inevitable showdown. Now, let's talk geography. Mesopotamia wasn't just a catchy name. It literally means between the rivers, and it was the golden ticket for any ambitious ruler. The fertile lands fed by these rivers were the breadbasket of the ancient world, producing enough grain to feed armies and enough palm trees to fuel trade. Picture fields of barley and wheat stretching as far as the eye can see, interrupted only by the occasional ox-drawn plough. It was the kind of abundance that would make any would-be conqueror's mouth water. But this bounty came with its own set of problems. The city-states were like kids in a candy store, grabbing as much as they could, but never satisfied. They were constantly at each other's throats over territory and resources. Enterprising rulers needed to be as crafty in diplomacy as they were in war, which meant alliances were as fluid as the rivers that sustained them. One day you're best friends with your neighbor, and the next, you're bashing their gates with a battering ram. The economy, too, was a curious beast, driven by agriculture and trade. Mesopotamian merchants were the original globetrotters, their caravans loaded with textiles, pottery, and metals. They plied their wares from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, rubbing elbows with merchants from far-off lands. The city-states thrived on this exchange, their bazaars humming with the chatter of commerce. But wealth was a double-edged sword, as it often is. While it brought prosperity, it also painted a target on their backs for rivals eager to seize the riches for themselves. Now, if you're wondering why these city-states couldn't just get along, you're not alone. Historians have puzzled over this for centuries. Some say it's in our nature to compete, while others argue that the scarcity of resources fostered a survival of the fittest mentality. Either way, the stage was set for a dramatic takeover. Enter Sargon of Akkad, a man whose ambition was as vast as the Mesopotamian plains and whose cunning matched the twisting currents of the Euphrates. Before Sargon arrived on the scene, the political landscape of Mesopotamia was a hot mess. City-states ruled by priest-kings were the norm, each claiming divine favor from the pantheon of gods that loomed large over everyday life. But divine mandate only got you so far. Real power was measured in soldiers and stockpiles. And while these city-states were busy invoking the gods, Sargon was busy building the world's first empire. Sargon's rise to power wasn't just a tale of military conquest. It was a masterclass in opportunism. He didn't just conquer cities, he absorbed them. His strategy was as much about diplomacy as it was about warfare. He knew that to control Mesopotamia, he had to win over the hearts and minds of its people, and so he did. The Akkadian Empire, as it would come to be known, wasn't just a collection of conquered territories. It was a unified state with a centralized government that would lay the groundwork for future empires. The prelude to this empire was as chaotic as it was fascinating. Mesopotamia was a land of contrasts, where peace was as fleeting as a summer rain, and power was as intoxicating as the finest wine. The rise of the Akkadian Empire was inevitable in such a landscape, as Sargon's ambitions dovetailed perfectly with the fractured state of the region. In this theater of perpetual conflict, Sargon would emerge not just as a conqueror, but as a unifier, weaving together the disparate threads of Mesopotamian society into a tapestry that would endure for centuries. But that, my friends, is a story for another time. Sargon's story kicks off like an underdog tale straight out of Hollywood, if Hollywood had a penchant for ancient Mesopotamian geopolitics. Our man began his meteoric climb not as a prince or a warrior, but as a lowly cupbearer in the court of Kish. Now, don't let the job title fool you. In those days, a cupbearer wasn't just the guy who poured your wine and stood awkwardly at parties. This position often put Sargon within earshot of the powers that be, giving him a backstage pass to the political drama that was Mesopotamian city-state politics. Sargon's name itself is a bit of a clue to his ambitions. Meaning, the rightful king in Akkadian, it's almost as if he was born with a crown in his back pocket. He was the original bootstrapper, a guy who saw the chaos around him and thought, yeah, I can work with this. While the priest-kings of city-states were busy getting lost in their own divine right, Sargon was plotting something a little more down-to-earth. The creation of an empire that would make even the gods sit up and take notice. His rise to power was as much about timing as it was about talent. In a landscape perpetually embroiled in petty skirmishes and shifting alliances, Sargon seized the moment with the finesse of a chess grandmaster. He didn't just play the game, he flipped the board by strategically allying himself with the right people and breaking ties when it suited him. Sargon managed to amass an army that was as formidable as it was loyal. It wasn't long before he toppled the king of Kish to become the ruler himself. And that, my friends, was just the beginning. The key to Sargon's success wasn't just brute force. Sure, he wielded a mean sword, but he also had a knack for military innovation that would make Sun Tzu nod in approval. Sargon's army was like a well-oiled machine, disciplined and efficient in ways that made his enemies look like they were still playing with wooden swords. His forces were organized into tight-knit units, capable of executing complex maneuvers that left rivals scratching their heads and running for cover. Think of it as the ancient version of a blitzkrieg, only with chariots and spears, instead of tanks and planes. But conquering city-states wasn't just about who had the bigger army. Sargon understood that to keep his newfound empire from falling apart faster than a sandcastle at high tide, he needed a solid system of governance. Enter the concept of early bureaucracy, a revolutionary idea for its time. Sargon established a centralized administration that knit together the various territories under his rule, ensuring that taxes flowed smoothly and rebellions were nipped in the bud. This wasn't just about keeping the peace. It was about creating a sense of unity among the diverse peoples he had conquered. In the world of ancient politics, Sargon was something of a rock star. He wasn't just a ruler, he was a brand. He proclaimed himself King of the Four Quarters, a title that made it clear his ambitions knew no bounds. His empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, covering an area that would make even today's politicians green with envy. And it wasn't just about the land, it was about the legacy. Sargon's reign set the standard for what an empire could be, demonstrating that with the right mix of strategy and savvy, even a cupbearer could change the course of history. The significance of Sargon's conquests can't be overstated. By uniting Mesopotamia under one banner, he laid the groundwork for the concept of centralized authority, a concept that would echo through the ages, shaping the way we think about governance and power to this day. This wasn't just a bunch of city-states under one guy's thumb. It was a cohesive entity that functioned as a single unit, with Sargon at its helm. And while the Akkadian Empire wouldn't last forever, its influence would be felt long after its decline. Now, before we get too swept up in the romance of Sargon's meteoric rise, let's take a cold, hard look at the realities. Sure, he was a visionary, but empire building wasn't all glory and grandeur. It was also about the gritty business of maintaining control over a vast and diverse population. Sargon's innovative bureaucracy was both his greatest strength and his Achilles heel. While it allowed him to streamline administration and keep tabs on his empire, it also required a level of oversight that stretched resources to the limit. Managing this sprawling empire was no small feat. Sargon had to rely on a network of officials and governors who were often as ambitious as he was. These local leaders were given a fair amount of autonomy, but that freedom came with strings attached. Loyalty was paramount, and those who stepped out of line found themselves quickly replaced. It was a delicate balance of power, diplomacy, and the occasional show of force to remind everyone who was really in charge. And let's not forget the economic engine that powered Sargon's empire. The fertile lands between the rivers weren't just a boon for agriculture. They were a linchpin of trade. Sargon understood that controlling trade routes was as crucial as controlling armies. His empire became a hub of commerce, with goods flowing in from as far as the Indus Valley and Egypt. This influx of wealth allowed Sargon to keep his military well-fed and his bureaucracy well-oiled. But it also meant that his empire was a juicy target for those who envied its prosperity. Sargon's legacy, like all grand narratives, is a mix of truth and myth. While he was undoubtedly a brilliant strategist and a master of statecraft, the stories of his exploits often took on a life of their own. Over time, Sargon became a legendary figure, his life and deeds embellished in ways that would make a tabloid journalist blush. Yet even amidst the hyperbole, the core of his achievements remains undeniable. Sargon was a trailblazer, a leader whose vision transformed the political landscape of his time. As we delve deeper into the saga of the Akkadian Empire, it becomes clear that Sargon's story is not just about one man's ambition. It's about the birth of a new political order, the dawn of an era where the concept of empire would become a defining feature of human civilization. Sargon's rise was a testament to the power of innovation, the importance of timing, and the enduring allure of power. But as we'll see, even the mightiest of empires are not immune to the forces of change and the passage of time. Stay tuned, because the tale of the Akkadian Empire is far from over. Let's slide into the heart of the Akkadian Empire at its peak, where Sargon's grand experiment wasn't just holding together, it was thriving beyond even his ambitious dreams. This was the apex of ancient power, a time when the empire was as expansive as Sargon's ego, stretching from the Mediterranean Sea to the Zagros Mountains and beyond. Infrastructure was the unsung hero of this empire, with a network of roads that would make Roman engineers nod in begrudging respect. These thoroughfares weren't just for military marches. They were bustling arteries of trade and communication, linking cities like Akkad, Sippar, and Babylon in a web of commerce. Now, let's talk trade. If Sargon's empire was a beast, trade was its lifeblood. The Akkadians weren't just savvy warriors. They were shrewd merchants, presiding over a sprawling marketplace that extended its reach across continents. Picture this: lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, copper from Oman, and cedar wood from Lebanon, all converging in the bazaars of Akkad. The empire's economic engine was fueled by these exotic goods, with trade routes that were as intricate as a spider's web, but more lucrative than a modern-day stock exchange. Mesopotamian merchants were the original international brokers, wheeling and dealing in everything from textiles to spices. Their caravans are testament to human resourcefulness and greed. But before we get too starry-eyed about Sargon's wealth, let's puncture a few myths. The tales of Sargon's treasury, overflowing with gold and silver, are as tempting as they are exaggerated. Sure, the Akkadian Empire was prosperous, but it wasn't a Scrooge McDuck-style money pit. In reality, the empire's wealth was more about strategic resource management than hoarding treasure. The economy was robust, yes, but it was also precariously balanced on a knife's edge, relying heavily on the stability of trade routes and the productivity of agriculture. The prosperity of the Akkadian Empire was a house of cards built on the back of diplomacy and occasional strong-arming. Turning to cultural developments, the Akkadians didn't just conquer territories, they absorbed cultures. This was a melting pot, folks, and the cultural osmosis was as rich as the Euphrates alluvial soil. Artisans and scribes flourished under Akkadian patronage, producing works that ranged from the epic to the everyday. The Akkadians were trailblazers in the field of literature, with the Epic of Gilgamesh setting the stage for future storytelling. This wasn't just an empire of soldiers and merchants. It was a cradle of civilization where art and culture thrived alongside conquest. And speaking of everyday life, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. The diet of the Akkadians was as diverse as their empire, a smorgasbord of grains, legumes, and the occasional meat dish when they felt like splurging. Barley was the staple, appearing in everything from bread to beer, because what's an empire without a little liquid courage? Fruits like figs and dates added a touch of sweetness to their diet, while fish from the Tigris and Euphrates provided a protein boost. Forget the romantic notions of endless feasts. The reality was more about sustenance and survival. Now on to fashion. Akkadian attire was practical, not flashy, with men and women donning woolen garments that suited the hot climate. The rich might accessorize with jewelry, but your average Akkadian was more concerned about keeping cool than setting trends. And here's a fun fact. Sandals were all the rage, proving that even in ancient times, comfort was a fashion statement. Let's not gloss over the political realities, though. Sargon's empire was a complex machine, and like any machine, it required constant maintenance. The centralized government was a double-edged sword, facilitating control but also breeding bureaucracy. Regional governors, or ensi, were tasked with keeping the peace, collecting taxes, and ensuring that the emperor's laws were followed. It was a balancing act of power and politics, with local leaders often walking a tightrope between loyalty and rebellion. And what about Sargon himself? The man was a legend, sure, but he didn't have an easy ride. Managing an empire of this magnitude was akin to juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. Sargon's power was immense, but it was also fragile, depending as much on the loyalty of his subjects as on his own prowess. His reign was a testament to the complexities of leadership, where every decision was a gamble, and the stakes were nothing short of an empire's survival. The Akkadian Empire was a marvel of its time, a testament to human ambition and innovation. Yet, it was also a reminder of the impermanence of power. As we navigate the peaks of Sargon's empire, it's crucial to recognize that this golden age was as much about endurance as it was about expansion. The empire's achievements in infrastructure, trade, and culture were remarkable, but they were also precarious, a delicate balance that would eventually tip. In the end, the story of the Akkadian Empire is a microcosm of human history itself, a saga of triumphs and trials, of visionary leaders and inevitable decline. It's a narrative that resonates with the timeless themes of ambition, power, and the enduring quest for greatness. But hold that thought, because the tale of the Akkadian Empire is far from over, and there's plenty more intrigue and drama yet to unravel. Stay with us as we delve deeper into the annals of ancient history, uncovering the truths and myths of a civilization that laid the groundwork for the empires that followed. As the golden glow of the Akkadian Empire began to dim, the cracks in its seemingly impregnable facade started to show. Let's dive into the turbulent stew of events that conspired to topple this ancient powerhouse. It's a saga of environmental catastrophes, political missteps, and the kind of external pressures that would make even the hardiest empire builder break out in a cold sweat. First up, let's chat about Mother Nature. Around 2200 BCE, the planet decided to throw a curveball in the form of climate change. Yes, even back then, the weather was a mercurial beast. The Akkadian Empire was smacked by a severe drought, a decades-long dry spell that turned the Fertile Crescent into something more akin to a barren crescent roll. Rainfall decreased significantly, and the once bountiful rivers, those lifelines of Akkadian prosperity, started to recede like a bad haircut. Suddenly, the breadbasket of Mesopotamia was delivering more dust than grain, and those ox-drawn plows were hitting soil as hard as an overcooked steak. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a full-fledged catastrophe. The agricultural output plummeted, and with it, the empire's food security. Hungry bellies lead to restless minds, and unrest began to simmer like a pot left on high heat. Famine doesn't just empty stomachs, it also empties the treasury and tests the limits of social cohesion. The Akkadians found themselves in a bind, scrambling to keep the empire fed, while their agricultural backbone was crumbling faster than a sandcastle at high tide. But the natural world wasn't the only thing conspiring against the Akkadians. Inside the empire, Sargon's successors faced a political landscape that was about as stable as a one-legged stool. Internal strife reared its ugly head as power struggles erupted, with various factions vying for control like actors elbowing for the spotlight at a community theater production. The centralized bureaucracy that had once been Sargon's stroke of genius now became a tangled web of inefficiency and corruption. Officialdom devolved into a snake pit where loyalty was as rare as a Mesopotamian snowstorm. This was compounded by the empire's overextension. Sargon's ambitious conquests had stretched the empire's resources thinner than a hipster's mustache. Maintaining control over such vast territories required a level of coordination and manpower that was increasingly difficult to muster. Imagine trying to manage a sprawling empire with the ancient equivalent of dial-up internet. You get the picture. The further the Akkadians pushed their borders, the more they exposed themselves to external threats and logistical nightmares. External pressures were the final nail in the Akkadian coffin. The Gutians, a people from the Zagros Mountains, or the empire's vulnerabilities, and decided it was high time for a bit of opportunistic conquest. Picture them as the ancient world's version of gate-crashing party guests. They swept down from the hills, taking advantage of the Akkadians' divided attention and depleted resources. The Gutians were like a bad rash the empire couldn't shake, their incursions exacerbating the already dire situation. Meanwhile, the Amorites to the west were proving to be more than just a minor nuisance. They were the proverbial thorn in the empire's side, persistently probing the Akkadian defenses and exploiting every chink in the armor. It was like trying to hold a dam together with duct tape and prayer. Inevitably, something had to give. The Akkadian military, once the pride of the empire, was now stretched to its breaking point. Decades of fighting and expansion had taken their toll, and the once formidable army was now a shadow of its former self. The logistical challenge of deploying troops across such a vast expanse, coupled with dwindling resources, meant that the Akkadians were fighting with one hand tied behind their back. Now, let's puncture a few romantic myths. The decline of the Akkadian Empire wasn't the result of a single cataclysmic event, but rather a slow, grinding process that eroded its foundations over decades. It's easy to imagine a dramatic downfall, a last stand in a glorious battle, perhaps, but the reality was more akin to death by 1,000 paper cuts. It was a combination of environmental challenges, internal decay, and relentless external pressure that brought the empire to its knees. The empire's collapse around 2154 BCE was a textbook example of how even the mightiest can fall when beset by a perfect storm of adversity. The Akkadian Empire's story is a cautionary tale for any would-be conqueror. Overextension without sustainable resources is a recipe for disaster. In the end, the Akkadians were undone by the very elements that had once fueled their rise: agriculture, trade, and centralized power. And so, as the dust settled over the ruins of Akkad, the story of the world's first empire came to a close. Yet, in its downfall, there were lessons to be learned and legacies to be left. Akkadian Empire, despite its ultimate demise, laid the groundwork for future civilizations. Its innovations in governance, trade, and culture would echo through the ages, influencing the empires that rose from its ashes. But hey, don't get too comfortable. History has a way of repeating itself, and the lessons of the Akkadians are as relevant today as they were 4 millennia ago. As we leave the ruins of Akkad behind, remember, the tale of the Akkadian Empire is far from over. The seeds of its legacy would sprout anew in the civilizations that followed, each adding its own chapter to the epic saga of human history. Stay tuned as we explore the reverberations of Sargon's empire in the civilizations that arose from its remnants. So as we dust ourselves off from the ruins of Akkad, let's get philosophical about what the Akkadian Empire really left us. This wasn't just a historical hiccup. It was the first of many acts in the never-ending play called human civilization. Picture Sargon as the original influencer, his empire essentially the world's first viral hit. But unlike most viral sensations, the Akkadian Empire's legacy wasn't a flash in the pan. It was a slow burn that still flickers today. For starters, let's chew on the linguistic legacy. The Akkadian language was the empire's linguistic glue, a Semitic tongue that united its diverse peoples. It became the lingua franca of Mesopotamia, carving out a niche in history as the first known empire-wide language. Akkadian cuneiform tablets became the ancient version of email chains, spreading messages across the empire's vast territories. We're talking about thousands of these tablets, detailing everything from trade deals to epic poetry. It's the ancient equivalent of having your inbox flooded with a mix of business memos and the occasional forwarded joke. This linguistic innovation wasn't just about communication. It was about creating a shared identity. Language has power, folks, and for the Akkadians, it was both a tool of administration and a cultural cornerstone. As Akkadian spread, it laid the groundwork for future languages and dialects across the region. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'll find its echoes in the Babylonian and Assyrian empires. It's like the linguistic ancestor of Aramaic, Hebrew, and Arabic. So when you're stuck in a language class, remember, you've got the Akkadians to thank for that vocabulary quiz. Now, let's talk governance. If Sargon had a LinkedIn profile, it'd read like a CEO's dream. He pioneered centralized government, streamlining administration with a system that was more organized than your average teenager's closet. This wasn't just about asserting dominance. It was about efficiency. Sargon's bureaucratic machine was designed to manage the empire's sprawling territories, ensuring that taxes were collected, laws were enforced, and rebellions were squashed before they could even think about gathering steam. The concept of governors, or ensi, acting as regional managers was revolutionary. It was like a franchise system for imperial control, where local leaders had enough autonomy to keep things running smoothly, but were still accountable to the central authority. This was governance with a capital G, and it set a precedent for administrative systems in powerful states like those of the Romans and Byzantines. The Akkadian model of governance proved that empires could be more than just a patchwork of conquered lands. They could be cohesive entities with a unified vision. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of imperial organization. The Akkadian system wasn't without its flaws. The bureaucracy that kept the empire ticking could also be its Achilles heel, prone to corruption and inefficiency. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of red tape and the perils of power concentrated in too few hands. When you're bogged down in paperwork, remember, the Akkadians were likely the first to experience that particular brand of frustration. Culturally, the Akkadians were the original trendsetters. They didn't just conquer, they curated. The empire was a cultural sponge, absorbing traditions and ideas from the regions it governed. This cultural osmosis resulted in a rich tapestry of art, literature, and religion that would influence the Mesopotamian world for millennia. The Epic of Gilgamesh, remember, is the great-great-grandfather of all epic narratives, a story that has outlasted its creators by several thousand years. It's a reminder that while empires may rise and fall, stories endure, capturing the imagination long after the dust has settled. And here's where we get to the juicy part. What can we, standing on the shoulders of these ancient giants, learn from the Akkadian saga? First up, adaptability is key. The Akkadians thrived because they could adapt, blending cultures and technologies to suit their needs. When you're faced with change, think like an Akkadian. Be open to new ideas, and don't be afraid to mix things up. It's the ultimate survival strategy in a world where the only constant is change. Moreover, the Akkadian Empire is a stark reminder of the perils of overreach. Sargon's conquests were awe-inspiring, but they also stretched his resources to the breaking point. It's a lesson in limits, a cautionary tale for any modern-day power that dreams of endless expansion. Sustainable growth isn't just a buzzword, it's an ancient imperative. In a world of finite resources, knowing when to hold back can be just as crucial as knowing when to push forward. And let's not forget the environmental factor. The Akkadians were undone, in part, by climate change, a timeless challenge that remains as relevant today as it was 4 millennia ago. Their story is a clarion call for environmental stewardship, a reminder that nature can be as formidable a foe as any human rival. If there's a takeaway, it's this: respect the planet, because it doesn't play favorites, and it certainly doesn't forget. Finally, the Akkadian Empire's tale is about resilience. Despite its fall, the innovations it sparked have resonated through history, shaping the civilizations that followed. In the grand scheme of things, Sargon and his empire were the trailblazers who dared to dream big, leaving a legacy that outlasted their mortal reign. It's a narrative that encourages us to think beyond the immediate, to consider how our actions today might echo in the annals of history. So as we close the book on the Akkadian Empire, let's do so with the understanding that its story is not just ancient history. It's a living testament to the enduring human spirit, a tale of ambition, innovation, and the timeless quest for greatness. It's a saga that continues to inspire, challenge, and teach us, even as we forge our own paths through the twists and turns of modern history. In the grand soap opera that was 16th century Europe, few characters played their part with as much cunning and flair as Catherine de Medici. Her story kicks off in 1519 in Florence, a city literally teeming with art, intrigue, and the occasional bout of plague. Catherine was born to Lorenzo de Medici, yes, of those Medicis, and Madeleine de la Tour d'Auvergne. With a pedigree like that, you'd think she'd be set for a life of cushy luxury. Think again. Catherine's early years were a masterclass in the complexities of fortune. Both parents were out of the picture by the time she was just a month old, leaving her an orphan in a family known for its Machiavellian twists and turns. Raised by a series of aunts, uncles, and the occasional convent, young Catherine learned early on that survival was a contact sport, especially in a time when the average lifespan was just 35 years. If you were a Medici, you didn't just survive, you thrived, preferably at someone else's expense. The political landscape was a chessboard, and Catherine was a pawn groomed to become a queen. In 1533, at the tender age of 14, she was shipped off to France to marry Henry, Duke of Orleans, the second son of King Francis I. Now, don't let the romantic novels fool you. This was less Romeo and Juliet and more Game of Thrones. Her uncle, Pope Clement Roman VII, arranged the marriage in a move that had more to do with political alliances than heartstrings. Henry was 14 too, but instead of writing love poems, he was more interested in his older mistress, Diane de Poitiers. Teenage love triangles, but with a pope on speed dial. Catherine's arrival in France was nothing short of a cultural shock. She was Italian to her core, and the French court was a whole different beast. Picture Versailles with fewer mirrors and more mud. The court was a hotbed of gossip, treachery, and the occasional assassination plot, kind of like a Renaissance reality TV show. Catherine was the foreigner, the outsider, and to make things juicier, she was not exactly the belle of the ball. Her husband, Henry, was openly enamored with Diane, who was a whopping 20 years his senior. Talk about robbing the cradle, right? But Catherine, ever the strategist, knew how to play the long game. She was patient, observant, and slowly turned her disadvantages into advantages. When Henry became King Henry Roman II in 1547, Catherine stepped up her game. She had spent over a decade at court taking notes, and she was ready to use them. Her marriage to Henry wasn't a love story for the ages, but boy, did she understand the intricacies of French court life like a seasoned chess master. Her real power came not from her husband's affection, but from her ability to navigate the court's treacherous waters. One of Catherine's most famous moves was embracing the Italian tradition of court festivals, which she used as a political tool. These events were extravagant affairs that showed off the wealth and culture of her homeland, subtly reminding the French nobility that she was more than just the king's wife. Catherine used these gatherings to build alliances and showcase her influence, proving that she was a force to be reckoned with. She was playing a game where the stakes were survival and influence, and she was not about to fold. So, while Catherine's early years might have seemed like a series of unfortunate events, they actually laid the groundwork for her to become one of France's most formidable queens. Her story is a reminder that in a world where the odds are stacked against you, a little cunning, a lot of patience, and the occasional lavish party can go a long way. And if you ever find yourself in a tight spot, just remember, if Catherine de Medici could handle a royal court hell-bent on intrigue, you can probably handle whatever life throws your way. Catherine de Medici's story is nowhere near done. As Henry Roman II's reign came to an abrupt end in 1559 with a jousting accident that would make any extreme sports enthusiast wince, Catherine found herself thrust into the role of the Queen Mother. Imagine the awkward family gatherings at this point. Catherine, her 10 children, and a nation on the brink of a complete meltdown. It was like stepping onto a tightrope during an earthquake. Welcome to the 16th century, where the stakes were as high as the hemlines were low. Let's talk about her sons, the trio of royals who would each take turns wearing the crown and testing their mother's patience. First up, Francis Roman II, a teenager with the attributes of a modern-day TikTok star, but zero political acumen. He reigned for just over a year before succumbing to an ear infection that was about as treatable as a bad case of dandruff back then. His reign was short, not as short as a Vine video, but close. Then there was Charles Roman IX, who ascended the throne at 10. Picture a kid with all the power of a king, but the interests of a child. Dinosaurs, anyone. Catherine never officially ruled, but she wielded power like a seasoned puppeteer, pulling strings behind the scenes with an expertise that would make even Machiavelli nod in approval. She was the regent in all but name, steering France through a maze of religious wars that made today's political divides look like a mild disagreement over pineapple on pizza. The Protestant Huguenots and Catholic loyalists were at each other's throats, literally. The wars of religion spanned from 1562 to 1598, a lengthy affair that was as financially draining as it was bloody. Speaking of finance, the French crown was bleeding cash quicker than a leaky sieve. The wars were costly, and the economy was about as stable as a house of cards in a tornado. Catherine's solution, a little thing called diplomacy, mixed with a dash of ruthlessness. She played her son's reins like a chess grandmaster, always 3 moves ahead. One of her signature moves was the Peace of Saint-Germain in 1570, which attempted to pacify the Huguenots with concessions. It was the political equivalent of giving a band-aid to someone with a broken leg, but hey, it brought temporary peace. However, her most infamous play was the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre in 1572, a brutal event that makes even the harshest modern political scandals look like a preschool squabble. The massacre was a bloodbath that took the lives of thousands of Huguenots in Paris and spread through France like wildfire. Interpretations vary, but the reality is grim. Catherine likely played a role in orchestrating the massacre, a move that was less about religious zeal and more about preserving her family's grip on the throne. The event shook Europe to its core, highlighting the volatile cocktail of religion and politics. Catherine's diplomacy was a tightrope walk between appeasing different factions and maintaining control. She brokered marriages like a medieval matchmaker with a political agenda, arranging unions that would make even the most ambitious reality TV show producers envious. Her daughter Margaret's marriage to Henry of Navarre, a Protestant, was intended to cement peace, but instead lit the fuse for the aforementioned massacre. Spoiler alert, it didn't exactly work out as planned. Her balancing act in a time of intense instability showed off her pragmatic approach to power. Catherine wasn't operating out of malice, but out of necessity. This was survival of the fittest, and Catherine had no intention of being anything less than a winner. Her ruthless edge was a necessary evil in a world where loyalty was as unpredictable as the Paris weather. Through all of this, Catherine remained an enigmatic figure, part villain, part heroine, and wholly human. Her ability to adapt and maneuver in a hostile environment is a testament to her intelligence and resilience. She wasn't a saint, but she wasn't a monster either. She was a mother trying to protect her children and their inheritance in a world where the only constant was change. As we wrap up this chapter, remember that Catherine de Medici's story is far from over. Her legacy is a complex tapestry woven with ambition, power, and survival, and we've only just begun to unravel it. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the life of a woman who refused to be a mere footnote in history's annals. And so we dive into the next chapter of Catherine de Medici's life, where matchmaking wasn't just a pastime, it was a survival strategy. If you're picturing romantic candlelit dinners and moonlit walks, think again. In Catherine's world, marriage was less about love and more about geopolitics. We're talking about alliances that could make or break kingdoms, with wedding bells ringing ominously like a countdown to the next war. Catherine, ever the pragmatist, understood that her power was directly tied to her ability to maneuver her offspring like chess pieces on the European board. Her children weren't just her legacy, they were her insurance policy. Marrying them off was like dealing in high-stakes poker, with Europe's nobility as her opponents. She had 10 kids, which in any era is enough to make a parent reach for the aspirin. But in the 16th century, it was a veritable treasure trove of political capital. Take her daughter Margaret, for instance. Catherine arranged for her to marry Henry of Navarre, a Protestant with a claim to the French throne. It was supposed to be a grand show of unity between Catholics and Protestants, a marriage that would heal France's religious rift. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Instead, it set the stage for the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, proving once again that family gatherings can be murder, literally and metaphorically. But let's not overlook one of Catherine's more colorful inventions, the so-called flying squadron. No, these weren't jet pilots in Renaissance attire. They were a select group of women who floated around the French court, gathering intelligence and spreading influence like butter on a warm baguette. If you're imagining James Bond in a corset, slow your roll. These women were more about the art of conversation and less about covert operations. Think of them as the original gossip bloggers, wielding the power of information in a time when knowing who was cheating on whom could sway a political alliance. The squadron wasn't just about gathering secrets, it was about wielding them as weapons. Catherine understood that in a court rife with intrigue, sometimes the pen, or in this case, the well-timed whisper, was mightier than the sword. Her ability to harness the power of rumor and innuendo was a testament to her understanding of human nature. She knew that in a world dominated by men with swords, a well-placed piece of gossip could cut deeper than any blade. Yet, this period of Catherine's life was not without its limitations. Despite her formidable intellect and strategic genius, she was still a woman in a male-dominated society. Her power was indirect, reliant on the men around her, even as she deftly manipulated them. Women of her time were often seen as secondary characters in their own stories, and Catherine was no exception. Her influence came from her role as a wife, a mother, and a queen consort. Her authority was wielded in whispers and letters rather than decrees and proclamations. Her situation was a paradox, powerful yet constrained, influential yet dependent. It's a reminder that history's power dynamics are never simple. Catherine's story, while extraordinary, was also tethered to the societal norms of her time. She pushed the boundaries of what was possible for a woman of her era, but she could never entirely escape them. Her marriages of diplomacy were a double-edged sword. They offered temporary stability, but often sowed seeds of future conflict. The union of Margaret and Henry of Navarre was a perfect example. Intended as a bridge between faiths, it instead became a flashpoint for violence, highlighting the volatile mix of religion and politics. Catherine's attempts at peace were like trying to patch a sinking ship with duct tape, well-intentioned but ultimately futile in the face of deeper rifts. In her lifetime, Catherine saw France torn apart by religious wars, her familial alliances tested, and her own legacy questioned. Yet, she remained a pivotal figure in European politics. Her influence felt far beyond the borders of France. Her strategic marriages weren't merely footnotes in history. They were pivotal moments that shaped the course of nations. As we continue to unravel Catherine's complex legacy, remember that her life was a masterclass in strategy, resilience, and the art of survival. She was a queen who played the long game, a mother who weaponized her children's futures, and a woman who understood better than most that in the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. And Catherine de Medici had no intention of losing, not on her watch. But hold on, before we crown Catherine as just the queen of marital chess, let's dive into her impressive role as the patroness of Renaissance art and culture. You see, Catherine wasn't just about political machinations. She had a soft spot for the finer things in life. And by finer things, I mean transforming France from a feudal backwater into a dazzling hub of culture and sophistication. Picture it, the Louvre as a gallery, not just a fortress. Catherine had a vision, and it was as grand as it was expensive. First off, let's talk numbers. Catherine wasn't shy about opening her purse to fund the arts. She commissioned over 80 tapestries, a luxury that cost more than a small kingdom's annual budget. Her court was a revolving door of artists, musicians, and architects, all vying for her patronage. She brought in Italian architects like Philibert Delorme to design shadewalks that would make any Instagram influencer weep with envy. Her influence turned the French court into a Renaissance wonderland, complete with lavish gardens and art that made even the most jaded noble raise an eyebrow. And let's not forget the culinary revolution she sparked. Ever wondered why your breakfast pastry is called a croissant? While it didn't exactly originate with Catherine, her influence on French cuisine is undeniable. She introduced delicate pastries and refined cooking techniques from Italy, reshaping French gastronomy. Imagine a world without bechamel sauce. Pretty bleak, right? Catherine's culinary legacy might just be the reason you're not stuck eating gruel for breakfast. But wait, there's more. Catherine's love for pageantry and theatrics was legendary. She orchestrated elaborate court festivals known as magnificences that blended art, music, and dance in ways that would put modern music festivals to shame. These events were not mere distractions. They were political spectacles, reinforcing her power and cultural sophistication. It was soft power at its finest, a reminder to the French nobility that Catherine was more than just a political operator. She was a cultural icon. Now, here's where we dive into the murky waters of Catherine's black legend. This was the PR nightmare that painted her as a Machiavellian villainess, a scheming, poison-loving puppet master. While it's true she had a penchant for strategic maneuvering, the reality is more nuanced. The Black Legend was largely fueled by political enemies and religious tensions. It was less about who she was and more about the narrative her detractors needed. In fact, Catherine was a pragmatist. Her so-called poisonings are more likely the stuff of fiction than fact. The stories of her dabbling in the dark arts were largely exaggerated, a convenient scapegoat for the political failures of the era. She was a woman trying to hold a fractured kingdom together with diplomacy and cultural patronage, not witchcraft. Let's put this into context. Catherine was operating in a world where women in power were as rare as unicorns. Her ability to maintain influence in such a hostile environment is a testament to her resilience and intelligence. She wasn't a saint, but she wasn't the villain history often makes her out to be. Her legacy is a complex tapestry of power, culture, and survival, a blend of the Renaissance ideals she championed and the harsh reality she faced. Catherine's contributions to the arts and culture were profound, but they were often overshadowed by the political chaos of her time. Her patronage laid the groundwork for the flourishing of French art and architecture in the centuries to come. Yet, her image was forever tainted by the myths and legends that grew around her. It's a classic case of history written by the victors, or in this case, the survivors of a turbulent era. As we continue to unravel the life of Catherine de Medici, remember that her story is far from over. She was a woman ahead of her time, a patron of the arts, and a political strategist navigating a world stacked against her. Her legacy is not just the sum of her political maneuvers, but also her cultural contributions that continue to resonate today. So next time you bite into a croissant or admire a piece of Renaissance art, spare a thought for Catherine. She's more than just the mother of kings. She's the queen of reinvention. Stay tuned, because the story of Catherine de Medici is still unfolding. Her life was a masterclass in balancing power and culture, and her influence stretched far beyond her own lifetime. In the next chapter, we'll explore how her legacy was cemented in the annals of history, and how she managed to maintain a delicate equilibrium between her family's fortunes and France's future. As the curtain falls on the story of Catherine de Medici, it's time to sift through the myths and legends to find the nuggets of truth about her legacy. Was she a power-hungry matriarch, or a stabilizing force in a world that resembled a perpetual powder keg? The truth, as always, is more complex than the caricature. Let's start with her reputation as a power-hungry puppet master. Sure, Catherine was no shrinking violet. She was more like a lioness in a den of political predators. Left to govern a kingdom splintered by religious wars and family feuds, she was a foreign-born queen in a nation that was less than welcoming. It's easy to paint her as a Machiavellian schemer when you consider events like the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, which left thousands dead, and Catherine with a black mark on her historical report card. But let's be real. In a world where rulers were often judged by the bodies they left in their wake, Catherine was hardly unique. Her actions were dictated by the brutal realities of her time. Survival often required a ruthless edge. Catherine's reign coincided with one of the most turbulent periods in French history, marked by the wars of religion that pitted the Catholics against the Huguenots with the enthusiasm of a medieval football rivalry. She took the reins of power during a time when France's very existence seemed as stable as a house of cards on a windy day. Her attempts to broker peace, including the infamous marriage between her daughter Margaret and Henry of Navarre, were less about personal ambition and more about keeping the entire country from imploding. The peace she sought was a band-aid solution, yes, but in an era when long-lasting peace was as mythical as unicorns, you take what you can get. Now, let's talk economics. The wars had drained the French treasury faster than a Parisian can drain a bottle of Bordeaux. Catherine was left juggling a financial mess that would make today's economists cry into their spreadsheets. Her solution, the pragmatic, if not entirely successful, deployment of diplomacy, leveraging her children's marriages like a set of high-stakes poker chips. Her daughter's marriage may not have quelled the religious strife as intended, but it did eventually lead to a united France under Henry Roman IV, Margaret's husband, who became the first Bourbon king. So, if you're enjoying a peaceful stroll down the Champs-Élysées, remember you might owe a nod to Catherine's long game. Catherine's legacy isn't just political, it's cultural too. She championed the arts with the fervor of a Renaissance cheerleader. Her patronage helped transform France from a medieval backwater into a cultural powerhouse. Without her influence, the Louvre might still be a fortress, instead of the home of Mona Lisa's enigmatic smile. Catherine's love for pageantry and arts laid the groundwork for the French cultural renaissance that would flourish long after her death. Her legacy in the arts is a testament to her understanding that soft power, wielded through culture, often had a more enduring impact than the sharpest blade. So how does Catherine measure up in the pantheon of political strategists? In today's world, she might have been a PR genius, spinning her narrative with the savvy of a seasoned Instagram influencer. Her Machiavellian maneuvers weren't just about power. They were about survival in an era when the line between the crown and the gallows was often razor-thin. She was a queen who understood that in the Game of Thrones, it wasn't enough to win. You had to outlast. Despite the myths of poisonings and dark arts, Catherine's real legacy lies in her ability to adapt and endure, to transform the French court into a center of power and culture in a time of chaos. In the end, Catherine de' Medici was a woman of contradictions, a foreigner who became the heart of French politics, a mother who balanced her love for her children with the harsh demands of governance, and a queen who wielded culture as a weapon in a world of swords. Her story is a reminder that history is never black and white, but a tapestry of grays, woven with ambition, survival, and the occasional flourish of art. Catherine's legacy is one of resilience, a testament to the power of adaptability in the face of overwhelming odds. So when you think of Catherine, remember her as more than just a queen of intrigue. Think of her as a pioneer of the art of political survival, a woman who played the long game and in many ways won. The Mughal Empire wasn't just about emperors strutting around in fancy robes, though they certainly had a flair for the dramatic. No, tucked into their resume of conquests and court intrigues was a little hobby called architecture. And like everything they didn't just dabble, they went for the grand slam. But before we start daydreaming about the Taj Mahal, let's rewind a bit to the empire's scrappy beginnings, where the architectural seeds were first planted. Enter Babur, the founder of the Mughal dynasty, a guy who probably didn't foresee his descendants building opulent structures, but did have a knack for conquering and garden design. Born in 1483 in present-day Uzbekistan, Babur was a descendant of Timur on his father's side and Genghis Khan on his mother's. Talk about a pedigree. He spent his early years in a game of musical chairs, hopping from one throne to another, until he finally hit the jackpot with Delhi in 1526. But let's not sugarcoat it. Babur's initial architectural ventures were more about practical needs than opulence. He wasn't exactly rolling in gold at the time, and his architectural achievements were more on the let's keep the roof from collapsing side of things. Babur's love for gardens, though, was another story. He had a soft spot for the Persian-style charbagh, a quadrilateral garden divided by walkways and water channels. These weren't just pretty places to have a picnic. They were statements of power and control over nature, a literal carving out of paradise on earth. His design for the Ram Bagh in Agra was one of the first examples. Sure, it wasn't a towering palace, but it was a taste of the Mughal flair for symmetry and beauty. Fast forward to Babur's son, Humayun, who had a rather tumultuous reign filled with more drama than a Shakespearean play. After losing his empire to Shah Suri and then restoring it, Humayun didn't have much time to indulge in architectural dreams. But his passing in 1556 set the stage for one of the early architectural gems of the Mughal era, Humayun's tomb. Commissioned by his widow, Empress Begum, this was no ordinary mausoleum. Completed in 1571, it cost an estimated 1.5 million rupees, a royal ransom at the time. Humayun's tomb is where the Mughal architectural style really starts to flex its muscles. This isn't just any tomb, it's a precursor to the Taj Mahal's grandeur. With its Persian-inspired design, complete with a double dome, high arches, and a grand garden, it was a statement piece that shouted, "The Mughals are here, and they mean business." The tomb was the first of its kind in the subcontinent to use red sandstone at this scale, setting a trend for future Mughal structures. If you squint, you can see the architectural DNA of Humayun's tomb in the Taj Mahal, like an early draft of a bestseller. Now, let's talk about those Persian influences. The Mughals were like cultural magpies, forever borrowing and adapting from the lands they conquered and the people they encountered. Persian architecture was the bee's knees back then, and the Mughals integrated its elements with gusto. This was about more than just aesthetics. It was a fusion of cultures that reflected the empire's diverse makeup. The Mughals had an empire to run, one that was as much about hearts and minds as it was about swords and soldiers. Architecture was propaganda in stone, a way to showcase the empire's might and sophistication to both subjects and rivals. Balancing their architectural ambitions with the demands of ruling a sprawling empire was no small feat. The emperors had to juggle resources, keeping one eye on the treasury and the other on potential revolts or invasions. It was a bit like trying to host a lavish dinner party while your house is on fire. Yet they managed to pull it off, often using architecture as a means to unify their diverse empire, rallying the nobility and the populace around a shared vision of imperial greatness. While the Mughals were busy sketching blueprints, they were also dealing with the political and economic realities of empire building. These grand projects didn't just spring up overnight. They took years of labor, resources, and not a small amount of imperial willpower. Each structure was a gamble, a bet that its grandeur would outlast the whims of politics and the ravages of time. As we consider these early forays into Mughal architecture, it's tempting to get swept up in the romance of it all. The symmetry, the grandeur, the fusion of styles, there's a certain poetry to it. But let's not forget the flip side, the human cost, the backbreaking labor behind each stone laid, and the imperial ambition driving it all. It's a story of power and beauty, yes, but also one of pragmatism and realpolitik. So, as the sun sets on this chapter of Mughal history, we see the foundations laid, not just in stone, but in the very ethos of the empire. Babur and Humayun, each in their own way, set the stage for what was to come. Their architectural ventures were the opening act in a saga that would see the Mughals create some of the most iconic structures in the world. But for now, we leave them with their gardens and tombs, dreaming of the empires they built and the legacies they left behind. With gardens and tombs setting the scene, Akbar the Great was about to take Mughal architecture from the realm of grandeur to an all-out architectural flex. So, let's harp on our metaphorical camel and trot over to Faidehpur Sikri, where Akbar decided to play Sim City, 16th century style. Now, Akbar wasn't exactly an emperor who sat idly on his throne. Born in 1542, he ascended to power at the tender age of 13. And let's be honest, most teenagers are busy battling acne, not empires. But Akbar was different, and he had a vision that would make even the most ambitious interior decorators blush. Enter Faidehpur Sikri, a city built from scratch, perched on the ridge of Vindhya Hills, about 37 kilometers from Agra. This wasn't just a city. It was Akbar's dreamscape, a sprawling testament to his rule, a kind of Renaissance fair for the ages, but with more elephants and less turkey legs. The story goes that Akbar chose the site after visiting the Sufi saint, Sheikh Salim Kishti, who lived in the area. Legend has it that the saint predicted the birth of Akbar's son. So, in a move blending gratitude and grandeur, Akbar decided to build a city there. Now, before you get misty-eyed over this tale of spiritual gratitude, let's not forget the other, less glamorous bits. Faidehpur Sikri was also strategically located, with access to trade routes, and it was a perfect spot for consolidating power in northern India. Romantic, yes, but also a shrewd political maneuver. Faidehpur Sikri was a city like no other, taking nearly 15 years to complete. Akbar's vision was a harmonious blend of Persian and Indian architectural styles, a testament to his obsession with cultural synthesis. The city boasted grand palaces, vast courtyards, and intricate carvings. It's like someone handed Akbar the world's most lavish Lego set and said, "Go wild." The city was an ode to red sandstone, with every structure bathed in a warm, rosy hue. But let's talk specifics. The Jama Masjid, one of the largest mosques in India, the Diwanayam, where Akbar held his public audiences, and the Diwanai-Khas, his private chamber for more intimate affairs of state. These structures weren't just architectural marvels. They were the very embodiment of Akbar's reign. Magnificent, innovative, and yes, a bit over the top. But what's a city without a grand entrance? Cue the Buland Darwaza, which stands as the tallest gateway in the world at 54 meters high, a towering edifice meant to impress visitors, or, at the very least, make them feel slightly inadequate about their own porch. Built in 1575 to commemorate Akbar's victory over Gujarat, this gateway was the cherry on top of his architectural sundae. But don't let its imposing beauty fool you. It was also a tool of propaganda, a way to announce to the world, hey, the Mughals are here, and we mean business. Now, let's tackle a juicy question. Was all this architectural splendor merely a PR stunt? Was Akbar just the original influencer, using brick and mortar instead of Instagram filters to showcase his empire's might? It's easy to be seduced by the romantic notion of an emperor driven by pure artistic impulse. But the truth is, Akbar was as much a politician as he was a visionary. The city of Faidehpur Sikri was a strategic statement, a demonstration of power and cultural assimilation. It was a way to unify his diverse empire, to rally the nobility and the masses around a shared vision of imperial greatness. And let's not forget the economic angle. Faidehpur Sikri was a bustling hub of trade and commerce, its marketplaces filled with goods from across the empire. This city wasn't just a vanity project. It was a carefully calculated move in the chess game of empire building. Of course, there's always a catch. Despite its grandeur, Faidehpur Sikri faced one teeny-tiny problem: water scarcity. It turns out that building a city in a semi-arid region without a reliable water source is a bit like trying to host a pool party without a pool. By 1585, Akbar had to abandon the city, shifting his capital to Lahore and later to Agra. The city was left like an ornate set from a movie that wrapped up too soon, grand, beautiful, and eerily empty. Yet, the legacy of Faidehpur Sikri endures. It's a testament to Akbar's ambition and vision, a reminder of the heights of Mughal architecture. It also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of excess and the limits of imperial ambition. Akbar's city may have been abandoned, but its architecture continues to inspire, a snapshot of a moment when an emperor dared to dream big. As we leave Faidehpur Sikri with its towering gateways and silent courtyards, the story of Mughal architecture is far from over. We've only scratched the surface of Akbar's architectural adventures, and the best is yet to come. But as we leave Akbar's grand, yet ultimately deserted cityscape behind, it's time to fast forward to a time when Mughal architecture wasn't just flexing its muscles, it was hitting its peak. Enter Shah Jahan, the emperor whose architectural ambitions would make even the most extravagant Pinterest boards look like amateur hour. If Akbar built cities, Shah Jahan went for the jugular with monuments so grand they make the term statement piece seem like a tragic understatement. Born in 1592, Shah Jahan ascended to the throne in 1628, inheriting an empire richer and more stable than ever before. Let's just say the guy didn't exactly start from zero. His reign is often dubbed the golden age of Mughal architecture, and for good reason. The project that stands at the zenith of this era is none other than the Taj Mahal. Now, let's clear the air from the get-go. The Taj Mahal isn't just a pretty face. It's a marvel of engineering, a poem in marble, and yes, a product of one man's epic love story, intertwined with the not-so-romantic realities of empire and ego. First, the legend. Shah Jahan's beloved wife, Mumtaz Mahal, dies in 1631 during childbirth, and the emperor, heartbroken, vows to build the most beautiful mausoleum the world has ever seen. Fast forward 22 years, and voila, a masterpiece that's been wooing tourists and romantics ever since. But hold up, the story isn't just a Hallmark card set in stone. It's also a tale of logistical wizardry, and dare I say, a bit of architectural vanity. Let's talk cold, hard cash. The Taj Mahal is rumored to have cost 32 million rupees, a sum so eye-watering that you could probably hear the collective gasp from the Treasury's accountants. To put that in perspective, that's roughly what it would take to fund a small army or buy a lot of naan. Adjusted for inflation, we're talking billions in today's money. But was it really 32 million? Some historians suggest the actual cost might have been lower, but let's not ruin a good story with too much skepticism. What's clear is that it was a staggering sum, one that speaks volumes about Shah Jahan's priorities. Building the Taj wasn't just about throwing money at artisans and hoping for the best. It was a logistical feat that makes modern construction projects look like assembling IKEA furniture. The site in Agra, strategically located on the banks of the Yamuna River, was chosen not just for its picturesque setting, but also for practical reasons, like transporting the 28 types of precious and semi-precious stones that would adorn the monument. Yes, you heard that right. 28 different kinds, sourced from as far as Sri Lanka and Tibet. The white marble itself came from the quarries of Makrana, about 400 kilometers away. It's safe to say this wasn't a project you'd want to manage without a serious Excel spreadsheet. And then there's the workforce. 20,000 artisans, workers, and laborers toiling away for more than 2 decades. Imagine running that HR department. But here's where we pivot from romance to reality. The human cost was significant, and it's a point often glossed over in favor of the swoon-worthy narrative. Laborers worked in grueling conditions, with little to no recognition for their contributions. The myth that Shah Jahan had the hands of the artisans chopped off to prevent them from replicating the Taj elsewhere. Probably not true, but it does capture the air of imperial excess and control that pervaded the era. The Taj Mahal wasn't just about memorializing a lost love. It was also a statement of power and a testament to Shah Jahan's taste for the dramatic. With its perfect symmetry, intricate carvings, and ethereal beauty, it was a way to assert imperial dominance and cultural sophistication. The Mughals were sending a message loud and clear. This is what we're capable of, and you better take note. It was architectural propaganda at its finest. Now, let's not ignore the elephant in the room. Shah Jahan's architectural obsession didn't come without consequences. The immense cost of the Taj Mahal put a significant strain on the empire's resources. While it's easy to get lost in the glory of marble and minarets, the economic realities were biting. The treasury was stretched thin, and the empire's finances took a hit, contributing to the political instability that would follow in the latter half of Shah Jahan's reign. As the Taj Mahal rose in all its glory, the empire itself was grappling with the challenges of maintaining its vast territories. The Mughal Empire was a sprawling entity, and managing its complex web of politics, economics, and culture was no small feat. Shah Jahan's focus on monumental architecture, while leaving a legacy of unparalleled beauty, also meant diverting attention and resources from the pressing issues of governance. And there's the rub. The Taj Mahal is both a marvel and a monument to the complexities of power. It's a reminder that behind every great achievement lies a tapestry of human effort, ambition, and yes, sometimes exploitation. The blend of love, loss, and vanity that created this wonder is as intricate as the inlays that adorn its walls. As we gaze in awe at the Taj Mahal today, it's worth remembering that it stands not just as a symbol of love, but as a testament to the heights of human creativity and the depths of human cost. So, as the story of Mughal architecture continues, let's keep in mind the full picture. The romance, the reality, and the legacy that still reverberates through history. And while the Taj Mahal might steal the spotlight, Shah Jahan's era was a period of architectural excess that extended far beyond this one iconic monument. His reign saw the construction of other stunning works, like the Red Fort and the Jama Masjid in Delhi, each a piece of the architectural puzzle that defined his legacy. But for now, let's leave Shah Jahan and his marble masterpiece to bask in the moonlight as we prepare to delve further into the Mughal architectural saga and explore the reverberations of his reign. The story doesn't end here, not by a long shot. There's more to uncover, more to question, and more to admire as we continue to trace the trajectory of an empire that dared to dream big. As we leave Shah Jahan's marbled dreams to shimmer under the moon, let's step into the austere world of his successor, Aurangzeb. If Shah Jahan was the guy who maxed out the empire's credit card on marble and minarets, Aurangzeb was the one who decided it was time to tighten the imperial belt. Born in 1618, Aurangzeb Alamgir ascended the Mughal throne in 1658, and let's just say his reign was less about marble fantasies and more about military campaigns and religious rigor. Aurangzeb's architectural endeavors reflect a shift in priorities that might seem like someone swapped the Mughal blueprint for a Spartan manual. But before we judge him as the emperor who forgot his empire's architectural legacy, let's explore the practicalities and politics that shaped his style. or rather lack thereof. First up, the Badshahi Mosque in Lahore. Built between 1671 and 1673, this grand mosque was Aurangzeb's version of architectural minimalism, if you can call a mosque that can fit 55,000 worshippers minimalist. Its construction cost was around 600,000 rupees, a frugal sum compared to the tens of millions spent on the Taj Mahal. This mosque wasn't just a place of worship. It was a statement, a reflection of Aurangzeb's vision of a more pious, austere empire. It's like he took one look at the empire's collection of ornate buildings and said, "All right, folks, let's get back to basics." Now, here's the kicker. The Badshahi Mosque wasn't just a spiritual center. It was also a political move, a demonstration of Aurangzeb's authority in the culturally diverse city of Lahore. The mosque's design, with its red sandstone facade and white marble domes, echoed earlier Mughal styles, but with a focus on functionality over flamboyance. It was a way to project power without the costly frills, a nod to the empire's past while steering it toward a more conservative future. Let's not forget the economic context. By Aurangzeb's time, the Mughal treasury was feeling the strain from decades of monumental indulgence. The empire's borders were expanding, but so were its expenses, and maintaining control required more than just pretty buildings. Aurangzeb funneled resources into military campaigns, aiming to consolidate and expand his reach. The grandiose architecture of previous reigns gave way to practical structures that served immediate needs rather than eternal vanity. Aurangzeb's reign was also marked by significant religious shifts. His policies leaned toward a stricter interpretation of Islam, which influenced his architectural choices. The emphasis was on function and faith rather than decoration and diversion. The irony, of course, is that while Aurangzeb sought to simplify, his actions often complicated the empire's social fabric, leading to tensions that simmered beneath the surface of his seemingly pious policies. But let's not paint Aurangzeb as a total killjoy. While he might have tightened the purse strings on monumental architecture, he didn't completely abandon the Mughal flair for building. Take the Bibi-Ka Maqbara in Aurangabad, often dubbed the poor man's Taj Mahal. Commissioned by Aurangzeb's son Azam Shah in memory of his mother, the mausoleum, completed in 1678, bears a striking resemblance to its more famous cousin. It cost around 700,000 rupees, a fraction of the Taj cost, yet it captures the essence of Mughal architectural style, albeit with a more budget-friendly approach. The Bibi-Ka Maqbara is emblematic of Aurangzeb's reign, a nod to tradition, a reflection of resource constraints, and a testament to familial devotion. It's like the empire was trying to keep up with architectural Joneses, but on a tighter budget, a poignant reminder of the glory days without the exorbitant price tag. Aurangzeb's approach to architecture might seem like a buzzkill after the opulence of his predecessors, but it was deeply rooted in the empire's shifting political and economic landscape. He was an emperor navigating a vast, diverse empire, balancing the demands of governance with the realities of a strained treasury. His architectural legacy, while not as visually stunning, is a testament to pragmatism and a reflection of his complex reign. As we consider Aurangzeb's architectural choices, it's tempting to view him as the emperor who let the Mughal architectural flame flicker. But perhaps he was simply redirecting the empire's energy, focusing on consolidation over expansion, faith over flourish. His reign was a time of recalibration, a period when the empire's architectural grandeur took a backseat to more pressing concerns. In the end, Aurangzeb's architectural legacy is a study in contrasts, austerity amidst opulence, minimalism in a time of excess. His buildings might not draw the same gasps of wonder as the Taj Mahal, but they offer a glimpse into the complexities of Mughal rule and the constant balancing act between ambition and reality. As we leave Aurangzeb's era, there's more to uncover, more layers to peel back as we continue this architectural odyssey. The Mughal story isn't over yet, and as we move forward, we'll explore how the empire's architectural ambitions evolved in the face of new challenges and opportunities. So, hold onto your architectural blueprints, because the saga is far from finished, and there's still plenty of history waiting to be built. And so, as the dust settled on Aurangzeb's no-nonsense era, the Mughal Empire was at a crossroads. The architectural exuberance of Shah Jahan had been reined in, and Aurangzeb's reign left its mark as a period of austerity. Yet, as the empire marched into the late 17th and early 18th centuries, the architectural canvas began to look more like a faded tapestry than a fresh masterpiece. The decline of Mughal architectural innovation wasn't a sudden nosedive, but rather a slow, inevitable unraveling. The socio-economic and political factors at play were as intricate as the inlays on the Taj Mahal, only less sparkling and more sobering. Let's talk economics, the not-so-glamorous sibling of empire building. By the time Aurangzeb's successors took over, the Mughal treasury was lighter than an emperor's conscience after a lifetime of indulgence. Constant military campaigns, hefty maintenance costs for existing monuments, and the administrative expenses of a sprawling empire had left the coffers depleted. Think of it as the empire trying to balance a lavish lifestyle on a shoestring budget, with predictably shaky results. The grand architectural projects of yore required resources that the empire simply couldn't spare. When you're struggling to pay the electric bill, a new chandelier doesn't top the shopping list. Politically, things weren't looking rosy either. The empire was fracturing under its own weight, with regional powers asserting independence and European traders circling like opportunistic vultures. The British East India Company, with its beady eyes on the subcontinent, was transforming from a trading entity into a territorial behemoth. The Mughals, once the peacocks of the world stage, found themselves outmaneuvered by a company with the business acumen of a Wall Street shark and the military might of a small nation. The political instability made it increasingly difficult to justify grand architectural projects when the empire itself was teetering like a Jenga tower, missing a few blocks. As architectural ambitions dwindled, the fate of existing Mughal structures varied. Some, like the Taj Mahal, found themselves lovingly maintained, becoming symbols of an empire's bygone glory and a cash cow for the burgeoning tourism industry. Others weren't so lucky. Structures like Fatehpur Sikri became ghost towns, their grandeur fading into the backdrop of history, stories told by the wind sweeping through deserted courtyards. The once bustling cities turned into archaeological sites, fascinating to historians, but largely ignored by the powers of the time. It's a bit like discovering an old family heirloom in the attic. Valuable, yes, but not exactly practical when you're trying to keep the roof from leaking. And yet, despite the neglect and decay, the legacy of Mughal architecture proved remarkably resilient. It's the architectural equivalent of that one-hit wonder that just won't leave the radio waves. Mughal influences seeped into the architectural vernacular of the Indian subcontinent, shaping everything from governmental buildings to private residences. The iconic red sandstone and white marble combo became a stylistic hallmark, mimicked and adapted across regions and centuries. Even as the Mughals themselves faded into the annals of history, their architectural fingerprints remained firmly pressed upon the cultural fabric. The irony of it all, the very structures designed to showcase Mughal might and unity, became a testament to the empire's complexity and contradictions. They symbolized both the zenith of imperial ambition and the vast human cost behind the facades. As modern architects draw inspiration from Mughal designs, blending them with contemporary aesthetics, they're engaging in a dialogue with history, one that acknowledges both the romance and the reality of the empire's architectural legacy. So, what's the takeaway from this Mughal architectural saga? It's a story of grandeur born from ambition, tempered by pragmatism, and ultimately shaped by the unyielding forces of history. It's a reminder that behind every magnificent facade lies a tapestry of human endeavor, ambition, and let's not kid ourselves, a fair share of folly. The Mughal architects built for eternity, yet even their stone and marble dreams were subject to the whims of time and tide. As you drift off, perhaps dreaming of domes and minarets, remember this: history is a fickle friend, full of both marvels and missteps. The Mughals left behind more than just buildings. They left a legacy of beauty and complexity, a reminder that even the most enduring structures are built on the shifting sands of human endeavor. And in that legacy, we find not only the past, but also a reflection of our own present, a testament to the timeless dance between aspiration and reality.